Good evening and welcome to an online meeting of the Burbank Planning Board on Monday, December 14th, 2020. Before we begin our meeting, there will be separate periods of public comment tonight, one for the public hearing and one general comment period towards the end of the meeting. Persons speaking during the public hearing may only address the Planning Board regarding that hearing. Persons speaking during the general public comment period may provide the Planning Board oral communication on any matter concerning city business. If you would like to participate in the public comment periods, please call 818-238-3335. We will announce when the phone lines are open. For the invocation, Board Member Rosati will be conducting it.
Thank you, Chair Lou, and for everyone attending this meeting online. You know, this is such an important time of our year, but it's so different for many of us because of the circumstances of the pandemic. Life is a gift. Enjoy every moment this holiday season with your family and friends safely. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Rosati. Will everyone please stand for the flag salute led by Vice Chair Hadi.
Please place your right hand on your heart.
Can we please have the roll call?
Board Member Gamboa?
Here.
Board Member Rosati?
I am here.
Board Member Atikunian?
Present.
Vice Chair Hadian?
Present.
And Chair Liu.
Present.
Let the record show all members are present.
Thank you. In order to balance the health risks associated with COVID-19 and the public's right to conduct the people's business in a transparent and open manner, during the current state of emergency and in the interest of public health and safety, board members will be participating in an online planning board meeting. City facilities are closed to the public until further notice, and the public will not be able to physically attend today's meeting. The city is providing alternatives to in-person attendance for viewing and participating in planning board meetings. In lieu of in-person attendance, members of the public may participate in the public comment period by calling 818-238-3335. Do we have any announcements from city staff?
No, we do not.
Thank you. So there's a public hearing on tonight's agenda for item number 1. Now is the time and place for the hearing on project number 20-0005504 concerning a zone text amendment to amend the zoning definitions R1 and R1H single family residential zone land use table and the R2, R3, and R4 multiple family residential land use table to allow short-term rentals. Before we begin, do any planning board members have any legal or other conflict of interest relating to this hearing?
No.
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 Have any planning board members had any communications, including written or oral, with any person?
No.
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 Yes. I've had several people reach out to me and ask me about this agenda item, and I basically told them that it would be on tonight's planning board meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Ramirez, have the notices as required by law been given?
Yes, they have.
Thank you. Are there any written communications on this matter?
Yes, Madam Chair. I believe they were transmitted to everyone electronically prior to the meeting.
Yes, I did receive them. Thank you. Will the representative of the Community Development Department please introduce yourself and summarize the matter for us?
Good evening, Chair Liu and members of the Planning Board. My name is Karen Pan, Administrative Officer for Community Development Department. Today I'll be presenting a zone text amendment for short-term rental.
If we can get the presentation up.
Tonight's presentation will also be with Nick Brandt, who is an analyst with Community Development Department, and we will begin. Staff is recommending the Planning Board to adopt a resolution approving this project to amend R1 and R1H single-family residential land use table and the R2, R3, and R4 multifamily residential land use table to allow short-term rentals. Based on 2019 data, there are approximately 400 to 500 listings in Burbank, and that number continues to grow. With the rise of short-term rental, municipalities have responded by creating regulatory programs. Today, Burbank does not have a regulatory program for short-term rentals. City Council requested staff to look into this matter, and staff conducted an initial study session with City Council and the public in June of this year. Staff also informed Planning Board in July of this year of this effort. To obtain the public's input, staff hosted 2 community workshops and an online community survey, and we will go over that feedback. When staff met with Planning Board, board members provided overall comments and recommendations to the proposed regulations. The Planning Board emphasized how important it is to protect our neighborhoods. Some board members also expressed that short-term rentals take away from housing. Some board members also mentioned that hotels and dwelling units should be separated, and some wanted to understand what is the community's perspective and impact. For recommendation, this includes looking at homeowners versus renters versus absentee homeowners versus investors who own multiple properties, include hosted stays, include occupancy limit by square footage of dwelling unit and primary residence.
In addition to the Planning Board's feedback, staff undertook a community survey to better understand how short-term rentals are affecting Burbank and to learn about the community's perspective on regulating short-term rentals. 86% of respondents to the community survey were Burbank residents. 44% of respondents were property owners, 20% of respondents were renters, and 3% of respondents were non-Burbank residents. Most respondents did not know if they lived near short-term rentals, while just over a quarter of respondents said they either lived or did not live near a short-term rental. 97% of respondents do not operate a short-term rental, while 3% do. About 11% of respondents indicated that short-term rentals positively impacted them and their families. A slight majority of respondents were neutral about the impact of short-term rentals, and about 36% of respondents indicated that their families were negatively impacted by short-term rentals. A slight majority of respondents believe that renting out the whole dwelling unit should be allowed, while a slight minority of respondents did not think that they should be allowed. Lastly, 44% stated that someone who owns more than one residential property should be allowed to use their extra residential properties as short-term rentals. 56% stated that only primary residencies should be eligible for short-term rentals. The results of the complete survey are in Exhibit C in the staff report. In the last 6 months, staff took this opportunity to listen to residents on how short-term rentals impact their family. Staff was very fortunate to hear from many residents about their input and recommendations as from Exhibit E. Staff heard stories that were both positive and negative. Community proponents of short-term rentals argue that they allow homeowners and renters to generate extra income. In fact, for some residents, short-term rental income is their only source of income right now due to the pandemic. Allowing short-term rentals also makes Burbank a more welcoming place, and that guests can enjoy the local Burbank economy more easily. As an example, allowing homeowners in Magnolia Park to rent out their units might mean restaurants there get extra business. Community members against short-term rentals raise concerns about noise and parking issues, asked the city to rein in parties and large events, and were further concerned that short-term rentals would negatively impact neighborhood character. The community feedback that we as staff internalized as we developed the proposed regulations were that any regulations should protect neighborhoods and that enforcement is a priority.
Staff also looked at how short-term rentals are affecting businesses and learned about their perspective. Staff met with Burbank Hospitality Association in August and November, a nonprofit organization who oversees the Tourism Business Improvement District. Burbank Hospitality Association stated that the proposed regulations are important to them because they directly impact the existing hotel industry in Burbank. While short-term rentals are a competing business and add more hotel-like options for guests, the proposed regulations bring short-term rentals under a similar regulatory structure to the one currently governing Burbank hotels. The Burbank Hospitality Association also stated that the city has a responsibility to make sure that all visitors have an expectation of safety, security, and the ability to rectify issues should they come up. The Burbank Hospitality Association believes the proposed regulations meet these standards and will be critical to ensuring visitor stays in Burbank are enjoyable. Staff also met with Chamber of Commerce, and they're in support of the proposed regulations because it allows guests to enjoy visiting Burbank, which benefits the business community and also has the transit occupancy tax requirement. And both organizations' feedback are attached as Exhibit F in the staff report. Staff also met with Burbank Association of Realtors. The Burbank Association of Realtors did not provide a group comment or a group stance on the topic. However, individuals did provide feedback. There was a comment recommending that the city continues with current practices because of the low number of complaints. There was also a comment that proposed regulations should be loosened to allow flexibility to operate their business by the number of dwelling units that they own. There were also comments that accessory dwelling units should be used for short-term rentals. One of the comments that was repeated was to protect property owners' rights and allow people to operate short-term rentals with less restrictions. Staff also reached out to neighboring cities to understand best practices. Staff saw how short-term rentals impacted their community. Staff learned that neighboring cities have had different experience with addressing short-term rentals. For example, City of West Hollywood initially banned short-term rentals in 2015. In 2018, the City of West Hollywood rescinded its ban. One council member noted that short-term rentals are already happening across West Hollywood. And quoted from one of their council members is that so far, from a pragmatic point of view, better to have regulated version because it will be nearly impossible to enforce a flat ban. While there was a ban on all short-term rentals in West Hollywood in 2015, their city council reversed their decision when residents advocated to support short-term rentals, arguing the need to generate additional income. For City of Pasadena, short-term rentals impacted their community. Staff conducted initial public outreach in 2016. Residents and stakeholders expressed concerns about short-term rental impacting their neighborhoods, especially near the Rose Bowl district. When staff presented the proposed regulation in 2017, Pasadena at that time had approximately 750 short-term rental listings. With much consideration, Planning Board and City Council ultimately approved the ordinance to allow short-term rentals with restrictions. And more information about neighboring cities' regulatory program is attached as Exhibit C in the staff report.
Staff learned a lot about how other cities regulate short-term rentals, and a few themes emerged. Most cities have a regulatory structure that includes a mandatory business license or permit requirement for any host seeking to rent out their units. This allows city staffs to keep an up-to-date registry of hosts, allowing for real-time compliance. This can take the form of working with hosting platforms such as Airbnb to delist non-compliant properties so that they cannot operate on cities. Another emerging theme that staff learned from neighboring cities is that proposed regulations should be a sustainable framework that balances regulations for hosts and hosting platforms with reasonable limits. The overall goal of short-term rental regulations is to ensure guests enjoy visiting Burbank safely and that neighborhoods are not negatively impacted. Having clear expectations around noise, trash, parking, and other neighborhood concerns are important components for a regulatory program. Essentially, the city's goal of the proposed regulations brings short-term rentals under a similar regulatory structure to the one currently governing Burbank's hotels.
From the community and stakeholders' feedback, staff drafted the resolution and ordinance to be consistent with the general plan and city zoning ordinance. The full analysis is attached as Exhibit A in the staff report. Staff found that the ordinance is compatible with the objectives, policies, programs, and land use described in the general plan. The proposed restrictions and regulations on short-term rentals that we will share as part of this presentation will limit the distribution, number, duration, and impact on neighborhoods, preserving the low-density residential character of the city's single-family residential neighborhoods. The proposed ordinance also will provide opportunities for mom and pop operators of short-term rentals and require that short-term rentals participate in the city's transit occupancy tax program, diversifying the city's economic base and improving its long-term economic vitality and diversity. Additionally, as outlined in Article 10-1-1991 of the Burbank Municipal Code, there are 9 criteria for adding a use, and this is also listed as Exhibit A. First, staff found that the short-term rental use to be added to the 2 land use table is consistent with the purposes of the single-family and multifamily residential zones. The regulations will manage and limit the overall impact through licensing and ongoing enforcement in a manner that reduces the impact to existing residential neighborhoods. Second, it would also allow short-term rentals to be consistent with the basic characteristics of the city's residential zones due to the proposed regulations that limit their impact. Third, it would not change existing residential occupancy and applicable health and safety codes. The short-term rental use can be expected to conform with the required conditions of the city's residential zones. Fourth, it would be subject to the ongoing compliance with the applicable regulations noted in the proposed ordinance that will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare. Fifth, the proposed ordinance includes new definition and enforcement requirements that will preserve the purpose and intent of the city's residential zones by ensuring that residents are subject to regulatory provisions. It addresses noise, on-site parking, health, and safety codes, and staff determined that the use would not adversely affect the character of the zone. 6, it will not create more vehicular or other traffic other than the volume normally created by any of the uses permitted in residential zones, as on-site parking will be required consistent with current requirements, and because Burbank residential streets are already designed to handle capacity from residential guests. 7th, the proposed use will not create more odor, dust, dirt, smoke, noise, vibration, illumination, glare, unsightliness, or any other objectable influence than the amount normally created by any other permitted use, as the provisions of the ordinance provide the city remedies for enforcement. Eighth, the proposed use will not create any greater hazard of fire or explosion than the hazards created by any other permitted use, as short-term rentals will be limited to the guest occupancy, and the use of short-term rentals units is a habitation only under the same building code and life safety requirements that are required by residential zones. Ninth, lastly, the proposed use will not cause substantial injury to property values in residential or any abutting zones. The administration and enforcement of the program will protect the community character and the city's residential zones or any abutting zones.
All of the previously discussed components were considered by staff during the development of the staff's proposed regulations. Considerable input from our residents, the business community, best practices from our neighboring Southern California cities were all taken into account through the lens of our general plan through the zone text amendment process, as we just discussed, to ensure that staff's proposed regulations fit Burbank's needs. Staff will now present the proposed regulations for planning board consideration. The City Council ordinance includes 3 amendments to Title 10 of the Burbank Municipal Code, which is the zoning regulation. The first is to add a definition of what a short-term rental is and what a short-term rental unit is. The next 2 are to add short-term rental unit use or short-term rental unit as a permitted use in single-family residential zones, R1 and R1H, and multiple family residential zones, R2, R3, and R4. The permitted use would be governed by a regulatory program in a new article to Title III of the Burbank Municipal Code as a business license. We'll go over that proposed program in the coming slides. We're going to start our discussion of the proposed ordinance that will be presented to the City Council, and this is a general overview of the regulations. We're proposing to allow short-term rentals with a regulatory structure governing their operation in Burbank. There will be a 120 days per year cap on their operations, and a maximum of 900 business licenses will be given out or will be allowed at any time. Accessory dwelling units cannot be used for short-term rentals. We will be requiring primary residency for all hosts, meaning that a host must live in the unit that they are renting out for at least 8 months out of the year. This also means that a host cannot operate more than 1 short-term rental. Okay. Short-term rentals can be broken down into 2 categories. The first is where a proportion of the dwelling unit is rented out, and the second is where a whole dwelling unit is rented out. And this is also for 30 days or less than 30 days. For example, if you own and live in a single family dwelling unit, short-term rentals are allowed. You can rent out a portion of a dwelling unit or rent out the whole dwelling unit with a maximum of 120 days per year. If you own and live in a single family dwelling unit and you live elsewhere 6 months out of the year, short-term rentals would not be allowed because you do not qualify for primary residence. If you rent and live in a single family dwelling unit, then you need written approval from your landlord in order to apply for a short-term rental business license. If you own multiple single family dwelling units, only 1 dwelling unit can be used for your short-term rental if it is your primary residence where you're living there for at least 8 months out of the year.
Now let's say you're a corporation and you own multiple single-family dwelling units. In this case, short-term rental is not allowed because the primary residency requirement cannot be met. If you are a third-party hosting platform like Airbnb and the hosting platform owns multiple dwelling units, short-term rental is not allowed because primary residency requirement cannot be met. If you own and live in a duplex, short-term rentals is only allowed in the primary dwelling unit. The second dwelling unit cannot be used as a short-term rental because primary residency cannot be met for that second unit. And let's say if you own and live in a multifamily where there are 3 or more units, short-term rentals is only allowed in the primary dwelling unit. All other units cannot be used as short-term rental because primary residency requirement cannot be met. Another example is if you own and live in a single-family dwelling unit with an accessory dwelling unit. The accessory dwelling unit cannot be used as a short-term rental because those are intended for people to live in. You can rent out a portion or the whole single-family dwelling unit for a maximum of 120 days per year. Lastly, if you live and own a single-family dwelling unit with an accessory dwelling unit, your primary residency is the accessory dwelling unit. Short-term rental is not allowed. It's because accessory dwelling units cannot be used as short-term rental where you have identified that's your primary residency. Your single-family dwelling unit has a separate address, and you've identified that you do not live in the main single-family dwelling unit and is not your primary residence. As a result, you cannot use the accessory dwelling unit or the single-family dwelling unit for short-term rentals.
The proposed regulatory structure will start with a business license that every short-term rental host would be required to obtain. Licensees would be required to pay annual fees to keep their license up to date. Every host will be required to list their license number on their short-term rental advertisement. City staff decided to limit the number of licenses at 900 in order to help limit any future impact of short-term rentals on the city's neighborhoods. We are planning that the city will also provide in advance a checklist to all prospective short-term rental hosts so that they clearly understand what is expected in their license application. Hosts will have a set of responsibilities as well. First, hosts must provide the city with contact information. Second, no advertisements may be made visible to the public on the host property, which is consistent with other home occupancy rules that the city has. Third, the city is proposing to have several safety provisions that hosts must abide by. Hosts will be required to have an operational fire extinguisher, working carbon monoxide and smoke detectors, as well as a fire evacuation map posted in their rental unit. Hosts that are not on a hosting platform must remit their transient occupancy tax to the city. Hosts will need to provide information about trash disposal to guests. Trash from short-term rental operations should not be visible from the street. Hosts will need to provide on-site parking spots for their guests. Our proposed ordinance will also include maximum occupancy rules, which are that there shall not be more than 2 adults per bedroom listed and the 16 guest maximum, whichever is smaller. For example, a host renting out 2 bedrooms in their 3-bedroom house could not have more than 6 adult guests. For another example, a host renting out a 9-bedroom house could not allow more than 16 guests, even though they have 9 bedrooms. The 16 guest maximum is consistent with recent Airbnb occupancy rules. Hosts will also be required to obtain general liability insurance or host on a platform that can provide that insurance. Our proposed ordinance and regulatory structure will include provisions that prohibit events at short-term rentals, meaning no commercial events, group gatherings, or parties will be allowed. Weddings will not be allowed as well. We would like to keep the only business happening at the short-term rental to be that of the short-term rental itself. We're also proposing quiet hours of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., consistent with our current Burbank Municipal Code section on noise. And guests are required to pay transient occupancy tax, consistent with how hotel guests pay that same tax today.
Hosting platforms also have requirements, and one of it is that they will be required to collect the transit occupancy tax and send it on behalf of the host. And also, hosting platforms will require hosts to list with the city's business license number. To enforce the proposed regulations, the short-term rental fines will be listed as part of the citywide fee schedule. If a host violates the proposed short-term rental regulations or operates without a business license, the first offense is $1,000 per day, $1,500 for the second offense, and that's per day, and the third offense would be $2,000. And then it would also be up to 12 months of suspension or revocation. With the proposed ordinance to City Council, there is a cost of $225,500 to cover the contractual services for code enforcement, administrative support, and an online system for the business license and the transit occupancy tax collection. The potential revenue that's reoccurring to the general fund is anticipated at $600,000. And to clarify, this is anticipated revenue for transit occupancy tax and the business license. And part of the staff report, it mentions $500,000, but that's just the transit occupancy tax portion. With short-term rentals, it's a type of business that currently operates throughout the city, and those businesses are not paying the city any licensing fee or local tax, such as the city's 10% transit occupancy tax. And prior to COVID and implementation of the Safer at Home orders from the county and the state, staff anticipates additional revenue with a regulatory business license. If the activity were to return at previously projected occupancy rates, then the revenue will be consistent. The additional services of obtaining a business license and regulating code enforcement complaints would require ongoing resources. And with the idea of short-term rentals operates as a business at home and is a common, and it happens every day in Burbank. Residents who live in single-family homes have a choice to host a garage sale on their property and or operate a business at home, such as an in-home daycare facility or an in-home music lessons. And short-term rentals have become increasingly popular option for both homeowners and renters as a revenue stream. And the City Council and Planning Board have a choice of whether short-term rentals need to be regulated and with what parameters. After this, staff anticipates presenting this information as a proposed ordinance to City Council in January of next year. Therefore, staff's recommendation is that Planning Board approve a resolution of the Planning Board approving this project to amend R1 and R1H single-family residential zone land use table and the R2, R3, and R4 multifamily residential land use table to allow short-term rentals. This concludes our presentation. We are happy to answer any questions that the board may have. We also have representatives from our building and safety team who oversees our building permits, business license, and code enforcement. And that includes Ron Takaguchi, who is our building official, and Carol Ann Coates, our building administration manager. And we also have representatives from planning, including Shipra Rajesh, our associate planner.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We will now open the public hearing to hear from any persons who wish to speak on this matter. Each person may address the planning board for a maximum time of 3 minutes. To address the planning board, please call 818-238-3335. Phone lines are now open, but please bear with us as it may take a couple minutes for the first callers to get through the line.
For planning board, believe there's someone in the queue, so we're waiting for that call to be forwarded.
Thanks, Mr. Emery.
Mitchell Sargent, you are now live with the planning board.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi.
Hello, Mitchell.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how this works. This is my first time going. Do I just kind of say my piece, or how does it work?
Yes,
Mitchell?
you may go ahead and speak, and we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, regarding Airbnbs in Burbank, we have been Burbank residents since 2017, and love it. And unfortunately, due to COVID, both my wife and I were laid off. We were both in the wine industry and pretty successful and doing great. And then COVID came and kind of ripped the carpet out from under us. So we had to pivot. So in doing so, we converted our home to be able to do Airbnb hosting. So we did a pretty hefty investment there to create a separate entrance for Airbnb guests. And so they're separate from our home and have their own entrance and exit, so we don't actually have to interface with them. And honestly, it's been wonderful. Like, it has been our savior through this pandemic. It helps cover our mortgage. You know, we were worried that we were going to lose our home, you know, because we didn't know when the end of the COVID crisis was going to end. And, you know, as we're going through it right now, it seems like the end, well, we don't know when the end is. So it's a scary thought, and to eliminate our ability to host now is really kind of the worst time to be having to face this. And, you know, I want to say that Airbnb has been an excellent source for us as hosts to help us deal with COVID, and, you know, for taking the proper safety precautions. You know, it outlines everything that we need to do to be safe during the pandemic. You know, how to clean, how to care. It limits the number of people, but also our home, we can only have 2 people stay anyway. But I think that's pretty much covers kind of us. You know, it's something that we have been relying on for income during, you know, after we lost our jobs due to COVID. And you know, we don't necessarily want to be Airbnb hosts forever, but you know, it's what saved us for now. And so my ask is that we delay, or, you know, never have to give up our right to be hosts. So that's my piece.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent. Do we have any other callers?
Yes, we have a couple callers in the queue.
Okay, thank you.
Diane Pandolfini, you are now live with the planning board.
Hi, planning board. Hello?
Hello. Hello, we hear you.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Thank you for allowing us to give comment on this topic. Should I just go right into kind of what I have to say about it, or?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes to present your
okay.
public comment.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to let you know that I've been living in Burbank now for several years, and recently with the pandemic, Airbnb has become my saving grace. I've had to focus on it. Unfortunately, it was a hobby at first, and it was fun, and now it's my only livelihood. But I love doing it, and on top of that, like I do understand the need to regulate it somewhat and to have restrictions, and in the future, I think that like I definitely would understand the need to have a business license to do it, and I'm all for that. But I am opposed to like the cap on the number of days of the year that you can do it, at least right now, while it's my only source of income to keep my house. But also, like, I really do, I do think that at least the way that I host, I don't know about other hosts. I'm sure that they're all trying to do the right things, like, and being very safe about it with COVID. And in addition to that, my neighbors are all aware of the situation. They're aware that I'm hosting. Like, I'm very specific about my rules. Like, I have great guests. So it's not like a nuisance to the community. And if anything, I feel like it is a small business that Burbank could benefit from. What I find is that a lot of the guests for Airbnb want a different experience than hotel guests. I know that the hotels push not to have Airbnb in the communities, and I feel like it's a different product. And on top of that, it's much safer during COVID to be at somebody's house that has very stringent, cleaning regulations than in a hotel with a lot of other guests. So I think it's also a service to the community at this point in time. I find that a lot of the guests are locals that have to leave their house for a few days or a week at a time, and they don't have a choice but to find another place to stay, or they're in town visiting family due to a death or a birth, like something urgent. And I do think that these are really good reasons to have hosts that are reliable and provide a great product that you can count on, and that the city can count on as well. So,
Madam, you've hit the 3 minutes, so thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.
We do have one more call in the queue.
Jana Percebieda, you are now live with the Planning Board.
Thank you. Hi. We are very sympathetic with all of the COVID activity and all. We have been very active with the workshops and trying to stay current with everything. Our neighborhood was besieged with particularly one home that was doing nightly rentals, and they were gigantic parties. It got to the point we were calling the police. Everyone, our neighbors, 3 or 4 homes around the home, were calling almost nightly. And it ended up where there was actually a gun, and we have 4 children that live next door to, small children that live next door to the home. We were very, very concerned about this the way it was handled. I'm concerned about the safety of this issue. I particularly was concerned because it went from 30 days of rental to now it's 120 days max. I think those 2 should be incorporated where you're not renting to one person for more than 30 days. I particularly understand what Diane and the caller before that were saying. We are also jobless, but we really want to keep the integrity of our neighborhoods and the city of Burbank, which has always stood for family and community. this kind of takeover of Airbnb and almost lawlessness to a degree is really not something that should be tolerated by the city. And I hope that they will really look at the carelessness of this. I know Nick and Karen, I've been working with them too, and they're both very, very good people, but I think that we're missing a few of the points that need to be really drawn in. And I said, let's go a little bit slower. Let's not just go out and say 120 days. We watched this guy go night after night and lie to the police and lie to the code enforcement, and we just don't want that to happen. And it is happening. As you can see, they're showing you hundreds of people that are doing this. I'm sure the people that live in their homes are a little more careful, but the people that are not, and these are alternate residences that they're renting out to. So please, please, please be careful for the people that love Burbank. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other calls?
Yes, we have one more call in the queue.
Thank you.
Jay Giesenhammer, you are now live with the Planning Board.
Hi, good evening. Good evening, Chair and Board and City people. You are now live with the Planning Board. Okay, good evening. This is Jay. Good evening, Chair and Board members and City representatives. Good evening. This is Jay. Good evening, Chair and Board members and City representatives.
Ms. Geisenheimer, can you mute your TV because you're getting delayed feedback and we're not able to understand what you're saying?
All right. I believe in, as a realtor, I believe in property rights, people's property rights. They have the right to do with their property and within the law of quiet and respectful of neighbors. I also think that there's some things about this that are not that great, like the days, the tax. There are some things that need further thinking. I think it's too early to make a decision, and I am asking that we delay this further and have more conversation with people like the Burbank Association of Realtors and other organizations. And so that is my request, that we keep this on the side burner for now and look at some more points, have some more meetings, and then make some decisions. I don't know if you can do that before the January 12th meeting. Maybe you extend both, but that would be my request. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Lou, we have 7 more calls in the queue, so they're just going to be.
Ed Sanchez, you are now live with the Planning Board.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for everything that you're doing for our fine city. This is Ed Sanchez, 2020 President of the Burbank Association of Realtors. Thank you for allowing me to speak on the matter. As the Association of Realtors, it is our main objective to preserve the rights of homeowners. The Burbank Association of Realtors has no official position on this matter, as we were only notified of this about 4 days ago on December 10th. It was brought to our attention at a very informal marketing meeting. We have not had time or adequate time to convene, to discuss, and to give any kind of formal input on the matter. We would just like you to, we would like to propose that this be postponed until after the first of the year, not only for us, but for the community to be fully informed and provide adequate feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
John Garreau, you are now live with the Planning Board.
Yes, thank you. This is John Giroux, and I appreciate your time. these are some issues to be incorporated into your discussion. I just became aware of this in the past hour, so I just wrote down a few notes here. While some people can use extra income during the COVID period, this proposal, this measure would be for the long term, so we have to keep that in mind. It's not just a short-term gap for income. Street parking is a challenge in most areas of Burbank, especially with ADUs not requiring on-site parking. This could only exacerbate the situation. A limit of number of permits issued, 900 as proposed, will not truly ensure that unlicensed activities of residential properties will not take place, albeit a violation. In other words, people will still be doing things in an unlicensed fashion. Additional revenue to the city does not necessarily justify this use over and beyond what ADUs are being proposed now as mandated by the state. I don't believe that hiring a management company or consultant to process and hire to process these STRs and registration is going to solve the problem. It's going to cost money. City staff and police will still be engaged in this type of supervision as well. Transient occupancy in general brings in perhaps more crime. This type of temporary occupancy contemplated in the use of residential neighborhoods is just another burden on neighbors, homeowners, as well as existing renters alike, especially a limit of 16 people or up to 16 people. It's kind of high density. This would definitely affect the character of the zone or the area. And a reminder that there were 3 houses at the corner of Sherlock and Elmwood at one point that had Airbnb or short-term rentals that created major problems. I think you'll probably recall this. Also on the news recently, and in the Wall Street Journal, there's an article, and on Channel 9, that people renting in apartment buildings, the people who live in the apartment buildings were against this, seeing people coming and going with suitcases on a regular basis. This disturbs the stability of residential occupancy in the neighborhood. And I don't think Burbank as a community is really focused on something other than stable residency occupancy. Therefore, I believe that as a bottom line, city regulation of this would not eradicate or diminish any of the above issues. Also, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, and Glendale, of course, the host must be present during the entire stay.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. I think you've hit your 3-minute mark.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tamala Takahashi, you are now live with the Planning Board.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Pamela Takahashi. I've lived in Burbank for 21 years, and I also attended the 2 meetings that were presented to the community. So I appreciate those meetings that were presented to give us an opportunity to speak. I support in general fair and clear regulations around Airbnb in Burbank. We don't have them now, and I do think it's important to bring them into our city, and that they're run right for our character, for our city. There's a few items that I'd like to bring to your attention to hopefully that you'll discuss during the meeting tonight that I think are important. So right now, as was mentioned in the staff report, there are 400 to 500 properties currently being rented out for short-term rentals, and I would argue that the majority of them would not be in compliance with this new regulation. So I'm wondering how all of those properties will be, how they will react to this ordinance, this regulations, and how that would be enforced, especially in the beginning when all of it switches over. So that would be a very large job, and I think it's worth considering looking at how that would be handled. Also, looking at the proposed regulations, this essentially prohibits having properties that are dedicated to Airbnb rentals or short-term rentals. So it would force the property owner to either change that property to a long-term rental or to sell the property. And I think that's just really clear, to be clear about what this intention is, because I think that if that's not clear, it will probably get some backlash if it's implemented without that clarity. And then lastly, I just wanted to point out that the fees and the licensing per year cost about $500. And it also says in the staff report that on average, Airbnbs charge about $130 per day. So if somebody were to rent out their Airbnb property for 120 days per year at $130, that's roughly $2,000 per year. So $500 worth of that would be to fees and licensing, which means that the property owner would earn $1,500 per year on that property. So it's not a lot of income for a lot of work, and I'm just wondering if those numbers have been crunched, and I think most property owners would look at that and kind of wonder whether that's worth investing to consider that a business for only $1,500 a year of income. So I wanted to point those three things out to consider when looking at this, and but I do think the regulations are necessary. Thank you for putting this together and looking at how we can do this for our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Danny Rood, you are now live with the planning board.
All right. Hi, guys. Longtime resident of Burbank. Love the city. I am for regulation, certainly. As a professional property manager for vacation rentals nationwide, all these problems virtually disappear with the professionalizing of the industry and with common sense regulation. I look at it as you might even want to hold off until a post-COVID world because transiency is up. People really want more flexibility with their homes. And, the 120 days is a good start. People need more than that, certainly. We're doing great things with tourism, hospitality, experiences as far as it's great for the city. Burbank is a name recognized all over the world, really, and it is a vacation destination. So I just think that, bold, progressive kind of common sense regulation is a win for the city. So, and lots of people are going to come here for 30 days, 60 days, 6 months just to work, which is also essential. So, the hotels are needed. They're not going anywhere, but there's a whole nother market and industry, and the way it's changing too is bigger picture stuff. I'd like to see not a cap on the number of days for those people sharing their homes, and there are safety issues when you professionalize something. All those things come into play, whether it's liability or short-term rental safety. All that is addressed through legitimizing a real billion-dollar industry. So, thanks for all your work on that.
Thank you.
Elisa Cunningham, you are now live with the planning board.
Hi there. Good evening. My name is Elisa Cunningham, and I'm a Burbank resident. I oppose the current zone text amendment to allow short-term rentals. As identified in the community outreach and stated in the staff report, the two most important requests that the community asked for is to protect neighborhoods and to make enforcement a priority. We don't need to approve short-term rentals to achieve these two objectives. I'd like to see us protect the neighborhoods and enforce the current code, which considers short-term rentals an unpermitted commercial activity in residentially zoned districts. We could be like other cities that establish an enforcement procedure with fines so significant as to pay for the cost of the enforcement. That would achieve the first request, which is to protect our neighborhoods. If we could show the ability to enforce what is simple now, perhaps that will suggest we could enforce a significantly more complicated ordinance that is being proposed. We all know that enforcement is key, and yet it is what we have failed at time and time again, always citing a lack of resources and staff. We know that some existing short-term rentals are discreet and well managed by owners that live 100% of the time at the property, like the first and second callers, but the rest often are not. While short-term rentals are a source of income for a few residents, it's often at the expense of everyone else on that street, and in particular the immediate neighbors. Imagine what happens when one of the homes on that street wants to sell their house. They have to disclose it to buyers. Who wants to buy a house next door to what is essentially a commercial business? Who wants to live next door to a small hotel with a daily revolving door of strangers, up to 16 people in the house at the same time? The buyer will have to be someone who wants to operate a short-term rental and profit off of it, and thus can pay more for the property, versus a typical buyer who wants to live in the Burbank as their home and make this their neighborhood. Maybe if the numbers were such that we were collecting millions of dollars that could be dedicated to enforcement and adding something to the neighborhood to offset the commercial liabilities, maybe that would be more palatable. But to allow a few residents to profit off everyone else makes no sense, and it's not what the residents are asking for. This represents further erosion of our single-family neighborhoods, and for everyone who scraped and saved to pay more for a house in a single-family neighborhood, it's not right to strip that away and allow others to profit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine James, you are now live with the Planning Board.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Board members. Thank you for being here and for this opportunity to speak. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for your service this year. As we approach the end of 2020, it's been a difficult year with the pandemic, and now more than ever, we need strong leadership at the local level, which includes all of you, so thank you for that. I wanted to voice my concerns tonight, as well as my opposition to allowing short-term rentals to operate within Burbank city limits. Most of us are spending the majority of our time in our homes these days, working from home, distance learning our children from home, running businesses from home, and this is expected to continue long after the pandemic is over. That being said, it is critically important now more than ever to preserve the integrity of our community by preserving our single-family neighborhoods. I moved to Burbank, like many others, 5 years ago for its small-town feel and, in particular, for single-family neighborhoods. Despite our positioning within the large metropolitan area of Los Angeles, I feel extremely safe in Burbank. I know each and every one of my neighbors. I know our community, small business owners. I know our police, our fire. I love my adopted city, and I feel very fortunate to live here. People are moving to Burbank for these same reasons. We do not want to live in or become a transient-type community. As members of the Planning Board, I feel you have the distinct responsibility to preserve the character of Burbank's land for the future. The beauty of living in a city as large and as diverse as Los Angeles is that there is truly a neighborhood for each and every one. There are many, many areas across the city that are highly suitable for short-term rentals, and I hope these areas operate successfully and without incident. However, the streets of Burbank are not among them. We have wonderful hotels, motels, small businesses, and restaurants that will support city visitors, and all of these hospitality businesses, they do not pose threats to our safety, our welfare, or our neighborhoods in the way that short-term rentals do. To my knowledge, short-term rentals are not currently regulated within Burbank. There are no penalties, there's no enforcement, there's no citations for violating the short-term rental ban, and yet I'm aware the city has hired a contractor to enforce the mask mandate for public health and to ticket people for not wearing a mask in public. To me, this does not make sense. Both issues present concerns to public safety and to public health. I know each of you care about Burbank as much as I do, and you work hard to try and please all the residents of Burbank, but you sit in a position of leadership, and leadership requires difficult decisions be made. Homeowners, including myself, we pay steep property taxes, and the expectation is we have a safe, secure neighborhood to live, and we have quiet enjoyment of our homes. The staff tonight presented many upsides to allowing short-term rentals within our city limits, but very little attention was paid, in my opinion, to how homeowners will be protected and how laws will be enforced with these new rentals. Personally, I do not want to live next door to a business. I do not want to live in a community of short-term rentals. I am asking each of you to please remain steadfast in your commitment to preserve the character of our residential neighborhoods. We
Thank
have
you, ma'am.
exceptional neighborhoods in Burbank.
Thank you. You've gotten to the 3 minutes. Thank you.
Michael Hastings, you are now live with the Planning Board.
Good morning or good afternoon, Board Chair, members of the Planning Board, and very distinguished staff. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I did submit a letter today that was quite voluminous. Hopefully you will put that into the record. I do appreciate the work of your staff. I was part of one of the workshops, and it was very well conducted, and I really do take my hats off to staff. A couple of things that I didn't put in my letter that were brought up tonight, and I really do support everything that Ms. Takahashi, I believe that's her name, mentioned earlier. I think we need to slow down because the post-COVID situation here is putting us all in a position where we don't want to take cash out of people's hands that are having to rent their houses out to make their rent. But as it sits presently, the short-term uses are illegal in Burbank, and we don't have any code or any code enforcement that's enforcing these laws now. And even our city attorney admitted publicly that her staff couldn't clearly identify the large number of illegal rentals. So how would things change with the adherence to your numerous restrictions and requirements with the passage of this ordinance? It's so hard. If we can't police it today, what magic would this ordinance have? Also, keep in mind, Burbank is a great tourist site, but that's why we have so many fantastic hotels and motels for the transient and tourist traffic. So I appreciate your time and your efforts, but please preserve the integrity of residential neighborhoods. Some of us have been working at this for years. I've been a resident for 50 years, have served Burbank in a number of boards and commissions, and would love to see you guys work just as hard as we did to preserve the enclaves of single-family residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As of now, there's no more callers in the queue.
Okay, there being no further public comment, I now declare the public comment period closed. Would the representative of the Community Development Department like to make any further comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair Liu. Regarding outreach for the proposed regulation, staff began with a study session with council back in June and informing as much people as we can in our community. We informed the planning board in July, and then we also held 2 workshops where we did our best with public noticing. We also promoted it a couple of times through our social media accounts that we have, and we also posted it on our city website, and then we also used our email subscription that we have as a city to notify as many people who are as part of that subscription list. With community workshops, we did receive a little over 80 participants that attended, and regarding the survey, we received over 400 comments. There was also a comment about the ordinance and how we would implement those types of regulations, and we understand that there are a lot of hosts that are operating this type of business, and there's a period mentioned in our ordinance saying that there's a 90-day period for us as a city to educate those who operate who operate this type of business, and that there would be a period for them to register and obtain a business license and ask staff any questions that they might have. And so we're hoping to really use that period as a time to inform as many as those that are operating this type of business. As part of this effort, with a cost, the third-party vendor that we would work with would be able to identify these addresses that are currently operating. And so once this program starts to be implemented, we would have that information, and we would be able to outreach to those that have this business.
And just to give a little bit more context on how that works, these companies have analytical and algorithmic capabilities that can scrape all of the short-term rental websites for identifying information and use that to create a database where to send out notices to any short-term rental hosts so that they can get themselves in compliance by signing up or for register for a.
Yes, and with our proposed ordinance, it also gives a 90-day period also for hosting platforms to contact the city and inform us of who their representatives would be to ensure that we have ongoing communication between them being able to list these types of business license on their website. There was also a question about the fee. And if we took into consideration of how much the cost is, with the current city fee schedule, we have tiers for different types of business license. And we're proposing to add this type of license as part of one of our tiers. And it's a higher amount due to the costs in order to implement this type of regulation, knowing that it's going to have its own online system for people to register and submit their information and the required documents as part of their application. There was also a calculation on the number of days and the average cost per night, which is $130. If we were to cap it at 120 days, that total cost of the total revenue that a host could potentially receive would be close to $16,000 and not the $2,000. So I just wanted to clarify that cost. In terms of the regulation itself, the 120 days per year and looking at a limit of license, we really looked at best practices in neighboring cities on what types of regulations that they have, and looking at what neighboring cities have proposed and implemented, as well as our current occupancy rate for our existing listings right now, which is 1/3. We wanted to have a number that was representative of what would be allowed, that would be applicable for both the hosts and guests, knowing that this type of business is operating. There was also comments about COVID. So we have seen cities responded in different ways. Some of them have responded to COVID with short-term rentals, either changing it or choosing to ban it due to safety reasons and also income, and it has varied. And with our standard regulations that staff has drafted in the proposed ordinance, we really wanted to highlight the good neighbor policy and having requirements related to parking, noise, and occupancy limit. And what's new within the proposed regulation that we want to emphasize on is the notice of violation and having a clear standard and restrictions of who is incompliant and being able to address that. And also a new requirement that we're adding in our proposed regulation is that we understand that education is a huge portion of this to inform guests of what the requirements are, as well as a host. And so for a host, one of the requirements that you have is that you have to inform your guests what those good neighbor policies are about parking, about noise. And a lot of times they don't know what city regulations are when they visit Burbank. And so we wanted to make sure that within those proposed regulations, we would make sure that regardless if you're a host or a hosting platform or a guest, that you clearly understand the expectations when you're visiting and enjoying Burbank. Those are the end of my comments.
Thank you very much. Do any of the board members have questions of staff?
I do.
Board Member Rosati?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions for staff. One of the callers made an interesting comment Would you consider this $1 billion industry?
Are you referring to the revenue that the city could potentially receive, or just in general of how short-term rentals is operating nationwide?
The caller said that the short-term rental industry is $1 billion industry. Would you say that's true?
Yes.
Yeah, me too. I found it interesting that we have 500 short-term rentals in our city. And I would say the majority of those short-term rentals are being hosted by a host, and they're not paying TOT, which means they're stealing. They're stealing from our city. So what would make us think that we would have 1,000 short-term rentals, or let's say 2,000 short-term rentals that are being hosted right now, as they currently are, and they wouldn't be stealing from us?
With short-term rentals, we do see an increase with the activities, and what we're trying to propose in our ordinance is a sustainable framework, knowing that yes, it increases, but we want to make sure that there's a limit, so there is a lesser impact on our residential neighborhoods. And so with knowing that short-term rentals has been around for a while, especially in the last 10 years with the increase, with hosting platforms being available for hosts, we have the 900 business license limit.
But the hosting platforms right now are circumventing us. Right now. So why wouldn't they continue to circumvent us? How do we know that we're getting our fair share? Or how do we know we're regulating? They're circumventing, the hosting platforms are circumventing us now. So why would they give part of their profit to us now?
Mm-hmm. And with our proposed ordinance, we have requirements for those hosting platforms that are popular that you see. And one of the requirements is that when they remit the transit occupancy tax, there'll be specific information that they would provide to the city when that transit occupancy tax is remitted, just like the standard that we have for current hotels.
In addition, we also have requirements in our proposed ordinance that will make any host subject to the same sort of financial reporting requirements that our hotels are currently subjected to. They will have to keep records for up to 3 years.
But you're not answering my question, and maybe you can't. But right now, hosting platforms are circumventing you, our city. What makes you think that you're going to be able to corral them?
We have confidence in the contractor that we plan to set up an agreement with in their analytical and their software that can identify short-term rental properties using their software to identify them and get them to register. They don't need to look at the for example, properties on Airbnb are not identified by address. These companies can look through the pictures and all the geodata that are embedded in the short-term rental listings and determine what addresses those currently are. From there, they'll be asked to register. If they do not register, they'll be sent to our code enforcement division for penalties or fines, and those fines will rack up if they do not register.
Under your current framework of 120 days, for example, could I rent my house out Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, every Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
Oh, yes.
So that means if I was able to rent my house out every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, my neighbor, every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, for 95% of the time that he is a homeowner and home on the weekends, would have to deal with whoever, right? Quiet enjoyment, quiet enjoyment of owning your home. Most people, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's usually the time they're home with their families, et cetera, et cetera. So that means if you could rent your house out for 120 days, 95%, if you rent it out every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 95% of your quiet enjoyment, you would be losing. So I just want to clarify the 120 days. If you could chop it up and just go Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Ms.
Thank
Liu, I
you.
have a question
Sure.
to staff.
Board Member Atkinian.
We've heard a lot about the setup of, well, generally about the setup of what the ordinance is or what the ordinance is going to accomplish and so forth, but I heard nothing about enforcement. There's no set procedure in place as to how to enforce this. And as far as, we see at the planning board that we hear, everyone is already stretched. A lot of people working from home. We're understaffed. So how do we build confidence in an ordinance or a proposal that we give the public no clear path as to how it's going to exactly be enforced? And has anyone done a study? That's part one. And part two, has anyone done a study as to what it's going to cost to actually go through that enforcement? Because obviously there's going to be several few departments involved in this thing. I don't think the numbers that I see here are even close to what it's going to cost to enforce about $225,000 amendment to the budget. It's not even going to come close. I think it's going to cost more than $1 million a year to try and enforce a program like this. You almost need a department on its own to go through this. So if you could address those 2 points. Thank you.
Chair Liu, Ron Takiguchi, perhaps I could take that question.
Sure,
evening.
please do.
Good evening, Chair Liu, board members, Ron Takiguchi, Community Development, and Board Member Atukani, I'd like to address your question regarding code enforcement. And as we heard from the community tonight, enforcement is a key to preserving neighborhoods in the community, and we quite agree. And one of the reasons that we're bringing this proposal forward, this ordinance, is because it has the regulations that we feel with it a component of enforcement. And one of those being are the responsibilities of the host itself, the homeowner that is renting out his or her dwelling. And we put that person, hold that person responsible as well. Because should they violate any part of the ordinance, they are on notice, if you will, even subject to fines. Some of the enforcement penalties that we presented tonight. Part of the enforcement also includes the guests, the host, perhaps even the hosting platform, as Nick has mentioned. So this is something that we are bringing forward, what we feel are the best enforcement mechanisms. Still, part of the community concerns that we heard in our community meetings was parking and noise. And consistent with disturbances of the peace, staff has worked with Burbank Police Department, letting them know that we are bringing this ordinance forward as a proposal, and we would need their support in doing a response to disturbances of the peace. And one of the important things that Chair Rosati, Board Member Rosati mentioned, and that is how do you preserve peace and quiet during the weekends? And that is everyone's concern. And what we want as part of this is vigilance of the community. We are proposing as part of that $225,000 cost of the city, a contract inspector, a code enforcement inspector who would be dedicated for this type of enforcement only, together with the existing staff. And part of that will be weekends and evenings. So we hope that with all best practices of both host and the hosting platform, that it wouldn't come down to the horrors that we hear about short-term rentals. And we believe here in Burbank, we're not a beach city, we're not a college town. So we hope that the host would play a role in making sure that who they rent to is going to respect what we have built up here in Burbank. So I hope that helps a bit, Board Member Atukanian.
Well, Ron, I appreciate the information, but I'm far from being convinced that the city is capable of enforcing this ordinance under the current conditions, because it's going to be extremely difficult. I do not see a mechanism in place in terms of, yes, code enforcement gets called out or the police department gets called out, and I've read many comments in here where the police department was called and they didn't go out. They didn't go out, and neighbors were complaining, why is police not responding to our calls when we're calling them? So, I mean, I don't know the specific of the complaint itself. I mean, these are comments that I'm reviewing as part of the package, but obviously that was an issue where someone brought it up. So it's not only that, but I don't see a plan. It seems like we want to put forth an ordinance, but yet there's no plan specifically identifying what are the steps that the city is going to take when someone is complaining about, let's say, a problem short-term rental property. Meaning, first step, we will send a letter. Second step, if you call, police are going to go out. Third step, this is what's going to happen. Fourth step, we're going to go and visit and knock on the door. Fifth step, we're going to call the landlord in to come and talk to us. Sixth step, do you see what I'm saying? A clear path to give confidence in the ordinance as to what steps, what remedies does anyone have when they are confronted with a situation like this in their neighborhood. So that's aside. Now, I have another question of staff. Was there a consideration? What was the consideration for limiting the number to 900? Why not 1,200? Why not 2,000? Why 900? What is that based on? 900 being the 900 permits that are going to be issued.
Board Member Atukinian, I wanted to also respond to your first question about enforcement and how the city plans to enforce the regulations. One of the things that we've learned from neighboring cities is how important it is that we have a third party to be able to identify these addresses and have that data information available to us. And so staff-wise, we've reached out to at least 7 companies to look at the types of services that they provide and how their address identification system works, as well as their online permitting system and collection. And we've identified one that the city could potentially work with to be able to do that. And so while if the proposed regulations moves forward and the 90-day period starts, there will be a lot of educational period for the city as well as hosts and hosting platforms to make sure that we're compliant. And within that algorithm, we would be able to identify those that are currently listing, and that's how we got information about the 400 to 500 listings that we have today. And with that data, we would be able to educate those that would potentially comply would need to comply with our regulations. We have been working with community development staff as well as our police department in creating a standardized internal procedure to ensure that we have data available. Within that system, it will refresh daily, so we will know any new listings that come up on a daily basis with that information. With complaints, it would be a data system for both multiple departments to gather that information. And so at that point, if someone were to complain about a situation, regardless of what department you are in, the city would be able to identify whether it is a short-term rental or not and be able to enforce the regulations that we have today with the first, second, and third offense notice of violations that are $1,000, $1,500 to $2,000. The question about the 900 business license limit, we looked at also neighboring cities on what their limitations are, and then we also compared it to where Burbank is today. With a 400 to 500 listing, we estimated somewhere in between with 450, and knowing that we wanted a sustainable framework for this regulatory program, we increased that amount to 900 and to limit it at that point, representing 2% of our current housing stock. And that's how we arrived to the 900 business license at any time.
Well, based on that information, I appreciate it. You just mentioned as part of enforcement, multiple departments would be involved. Outside vendors would be hired. This is in addition to, let's say, the community development department, that is, staff. So I just don't see the numbers where the math doesn't make sense to me. And then there's going to be another program or issue where now the city is in the red for. And now the city has to figure out, well, how much money are we going to raise in order to cover this, I guess, pothole. But I guess on the flip side, right now there is the operation and there is no actual enforcement or collection. So these are the competing interests. And the 900, if 900, and another thing, you're relying on the number 900 saying, well, that would make it sustainable. We got 900, $130 a pop per day. We got $15,700 some dollars per rental unit per year and so forth. That's going to generate so much income. These are projections. We have an Armenian saying. It says, "What your calculations at home do not necessarily work out on the street," meaning that you can sit at home and make all the calculations you want as to what your projections are or what you think is going to happen, but that's not necessarily what's going to transpire when you really take it out and implement it. So, all right, I appreciate the information. It's under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of the board members have questions?
I have a few
Yes.
questions.
Board member Gamboa saw his hand go first.
Thank you. A quick question about the 900 unit or number limit. What happens to 901? What happens to 902? How do you, it's just a wait list at that point, or how do you decide who gets them or not?
Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I was going to say right now, we do have a limit. We're proposing a limit, and those that are the 901, 902, at that point, we would tell them that they are unable to get a business license. We can do is have information available where we continue to keep track of these applications or contact information. But right now, at this point, we would just inform them that they would not be able to get a business license at this time.
Madam Chair, just if I can clarify, so to the question from Board Member Gamboa, it's 900 is the maximum, that's the cap. So if you go over that amount, you wouldn't be able to get a license. And at that point, if you were to operate absent the license, you'd be in violation of the regulations that are being proposed, and there'd be an enforcement process. If you were to operate and at that point, you're reported as basically operating without a business license, similar to any other non-compliant business that doesn't have a business license. So to the question at hand, 900 is the cap that's being proposed. Some other cities have different caps, but Karen went through the reasoning as to how we arrived at 900. But like I said, it's, if the board recommended it be 500 or 450, same issue. When they hit that threshold, there's going to be a certain number that's allowed by license, and after that, it would be an enforcement issue.
So it's just a first come, first serve scenario for permits.
Exactly.
So in terms of,
Chair Gamboa, if I may, we don't expect to hit the 900 cap for quite a number of years, given our current level.
It's $1 billion industry.
Regarding enforcement, you outlined the levels of fines and everything. How does it get collected for those of us who maybe don't know how that happens? Like what happens if someone just doesn't pay, and how does that process work to bring them in line? And how does it relate to kind of our current system of conditional use permits, and how do those, what's that process for ensuring compliance in regulations with those businesses?
Board Member Gamboa, Ron Takiguchi. One of the things that this ordinance has that I think gives it a lot of teeth, and actually I want to go back and thank Board Member Otakanian for pointing out what was not in the staff report, which are the steps. And as Karen mentioned, yes, there are steps which are existing in enforcement. So I wanted to just make that clear to give the community confidence that, we do have enforcement practices that we will apply to short-term rentals. But to answer your question, as far as the fines, one of the things that this ordinance has is the penalty amount, if you will, per day. That is something that most of our other administrative citations, fines do not have. So this has quite a bit of teeth, and the process of issuing a notice of violation also comes with follow-up, and if need be, collections, also working with the city attorney's office for further prosecution. In that mechanism as well, there is the ability to suspend the business license, as mentioned, as well as look at the compliances of the property overall. So the mechanisms are there, and we will practice these with the other departments that we will use during enforcement.
Now, has there been, thank you for that clarity. Has there been any conversations with the platform hosts like Airbnb or VBRO to say, look, these aren't allowed here. Why are you listing them on your site? What's their role in this?
Yes, sir.
With the proposed regulations, there's requirements for hosting platforms, and with a proposed ordinance, they have been involved in looking at the proposed regulations, and they're aware of the requirements that are listed there. And so whether it's the re-emit TOT, having the requirement for a business license number on their website, they're fully aware of that type of requirement. And so if there is one that's listed without a business license, they wouldn't be able to move forward to list their listing on their website.
But what about right now, to Mr. Rosati's point, that they're not allowed to have them right now anyway? So what's the difference going to be whether we have these regulations or not? In theory, right now, you should be able to call Airbnb, and say, none of these are allowed here. Please remove them from your site. And what's the process with that? Or what are those conversations been like?
We have done that. The part about regulation that we feel is more protective of the community, and perhaps many of you know this, or the community does, is that when you go to a listing currently, it doesn't say in Burbank. They might use the words Burbank adjacent, and certainly they don't use the address. It's only when a renter calls and gets the exact location. So with this proposal for this ordinance, we are working with a third party to get the metrics and the listings, as Nick has mentioned earlier. And with that, we have worked with the hosting platforms. And Board Member Rosati is correct, that, okay, so these platforms are listing currently, but TOT comes from the host. The hosting platforms, Airbnb, they would submit to the city. And in speaking to them, they don't take great pleasure or even profit in listing properties in Burbank while they know that Burbank doesn't currently have an ordinance. They have reached out to us and said, "Would you consider this?" And we, held back, knowing that this is way far too early. This was many years ago, but now that it's under consideration, they would rather be here if we have an ordinance in place with all the regulatory matters that would make their hosting platform, let's call it legitimate.
And with this current process we're in, when, assuming the timeline, whatever the timeline is on, when would this potentially take effect? This ordinance or a version of it that gets approved?
If the planning board makes a motion today, we would be presenting that information to our city council in January. We're anticipating it would be January 12th of next year. And then there would be I think, 31-day period.
So just to clarify, so there'd be a first and second reading of an ordinance, especially with the zoning code. It takes effect 31 days thereafter. However, as you all read from the code, it says we're giving people 90 days from the effective date of the ordinance to come into compliance with the proposed regulations.
So would there be a scenario where it's possible to, if it was approved soon, to push out the starting date to make it kind of address some of the issues that some of the callers and some of the commenters made? Obviously, it's not allowed anyway, but it's something that's happening in this time that's, I read unprecedented a lot in those comments, and I'm sure we've all read it a lot this year. And obviously knowing there's a strain on people. So I don't know if there's a way to at least kind of account for a time period where, look, we need to plan for the future because it's more than just what's happening at the moment, but we also recognize that maybe there's some issues in this moment that might benefit from a delay.
I believe to your question, Board Member Gamboa, we can always recommend, the board can recommend grace periods for the city council to consider if an ordinance were to go forward. And I wanted to just get to one issue I think brought up by Board Member Atakenian on the enforcement. There's always the stick. You can verbally tell someone to non-comply, and then what happens with fines? Are they paid, or what is the next step? So maybe I'll allow the city attorney, Mr. McMillan, to kind of just chime in on what mechanisms are in place regarding that.
Good evening, Chair Liu and fellow board members. The kind of enforcement tools in our enforcement tool shed, if I may say, are in section 3-4-2808. We've talked about fines already, and as Mr. Ramirez said, in terms of collection, they have the option to appeal any fine. We have appeal procedures set out in the ordinance and also in Title I. If they don't appeal, or if they appeal and they lose that appeal, our collection power is in referring it for collection. Sometimes cities will partner with an agency to collect the fine amounts, or we could actually assess a lien against their property. So just wanted to give that, kind of take it to its ultimate, and if it gets contested or they don't actually comply with our fine, that's where we'll end up.
Board Member Gamboa, are you done?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna have Vice Chair Hadian speak, and then we'll go back to you, Board Member Rosati.
Yes, I have a few questions. This is for staff on Exhibit A9. It is on? Is it on?
It's on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. On Exhibit A9, where it says short-term rental unit, it will be one of the land uses allowed on all of the zonings that we discussed on the residential and multifamily.
That's correct. The identified zones.
And my second question is about the regulations on Exhibit A15. Item B under short-term rental regulations, short-term rentals are prohibited in dwelling units and junior accessory units. What is the reason behind that, especially that now that this is proposed, those units are actually separate from the main residence, especially during the time like this?
Board Member Hadian, we decided to keep or include this regulation due to past City Council action on accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. It's our understanding that the City Council passed regulations that require stays of over 90 days for those types of units for our city's housing goals.
So it's because of the ADUs and junior ADUs regulation of renting more than 90 days that the short-term rental does not allow renting those
Correct.
units. Okay. And I have another question on the 900 permits that was discussed. How is the distribution? I know that it's 900 to 900 applicants. One question is about the distribution and the cap per person or per business, especially for those businesses that have many properties for vacation rentals or short-term rentals. And what is it going to be a part of the platform, or is the licensing before applicants go on the platform to rent?
Your first question about the 900 limit, regarding the 900 license, it would be at the point that the business license is issued versus the number of applications that we would receive. So those that are interested in operating a short-term rental, their first step would be to go through the application process with the city to fill out that application. And you have to meet that certain requirements, such as having a fire extinguisher, ensuring that you met the parking requirements. Any other requirements that we have will be part of the application. If you are able to prove it through that application process and meet those requirements, at that point you would be issued a license, and then that number would be counted as towards the 900 limit versus just the application. If on day one we receive 1,000 applications, we would still have to go through those applications until one of them is issued, until we would count to that 900 limit.
So the 900 is the narrowed down number of applications that actually have qualified and they have the requirements. They meet the requirements.
Correct.
And how about inspection? Does city rely only on check marks on the application form that we have a smoke detector, we have a window as the secondary egress exit place? Is there going to be any inspection involved?
With the license application process, it's going to be online through a self-certification, noting that you self-certify and that you have proof that you meet the requirements, and part of the proof is having pictures and information available and certifying that what you're providing to the city is true and accurate. There is a process to go through those applications before you are actually issued an actual license, and so it requires a review of someone, which will be a third party, to inspect that application before it's issued. The requirements that the vendor or staff would look at would just be on the requirements that are listed in the proposed regulations. Outside of it, with building code standards, that would be a separate issue.
So that answers my question. So the first step is to pay the application fee, apply, and then go through rescreening, and then at the end, when they're approved, they will pay the license fee. Okay.
Correct. And then once they are issued, then they are able to list their short-term rental, and it's a choice for the host of where they want to list their listing. It could be on their own website. It could be through a hosting platform that are popular like Airbnb or VRBO. And if they choose to use a hosting platform, they're required to list out their business license number, even if it's on their own website. And if they choose to list through a hosting platform like Airbnb and VRBO, then those hosting platforms would remit the transit occupancy tax. If they choose to use their own website or use their own system but still operate this type of business, then they're required to remit the transit occupancy tax as a host themselves.
So the 500 properties that city has found online is only if they have posted ads on those platforms. Is this the basis of the 500 units?
With the algorithm from our third party that we're hoping to work with for the proposed regulation, is that there's algorithm to be able to identify those listings. They go through a screening through a very high number of hosting platforms to be able to identify these listings, and those that are individually listed can be a little bit more difficult to find, and so that definitely takes time to figure out those types of listings. But with the 500 listings that we have today, we anticipate that represents majority of the listings.
Which might be more. 500 is what is discovered, but there might be more, definitely more. And another question about the violations and enforcement. The code enforcement starts at the officially from the notice date or from the time you actually discover it's posted online?
There's two parts with notice of violations. Those that are operating without the license, code enforcement staff as well as a third party would be able to reach out to that homeowner and inform them of the new proposed regulations. If it's within that 90-day period, we would be able to call them to let them know, but after that 90 days, it would be issued as a notice of violation.
And there is an appeal option on both when the notice is sent out and when the violation is posted, right?
Correct.
The fine is posted. So 2 appeals at 2 steps.
For the notice of violation, when we are able to identify that those that are non-compliant, the notice of violation would come either that same day or the next day, and then the host would have a 15-day period to pay for that. But the fine, if we continue to see non-compliant, it would be a fine per day with the specific amount for that violation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And I have...
Chair Hadian,
yes.
If I may, I just wanted to add that in addition to self-certification for life safety compliance, we also have in our proposed ordinance a measure for general liability insurance of up to at least $500,000 in addition to that requirement. And what that will mean is that hosts will either need to host on a platform that provides that level of general liability insurance or obtain it themselves. Some of the bigger hosting platforms might already offer that, but if they do not plan on offering their rental unit on those hosting platforms, they'll have to show proof that they've obtained it with their application package.
Thank you very much. And I have one question about the increasing budget for, is it fiscal year 2021 or 21-22? I think I saw, let me find the page. Just have a question about that. It's,
I think, Vice Chair, I may be so you don't have to search for the fiscal year.
Yes, if you can look at where the exhibit that it has the request to increase the budget.
So just in general terms, depending on if an ordinance were to be approved by the council, one of the things that we have to do when we present it to council is we have to provide what they call a fiscal impact. And as part of that fiscal impact analysis,
On which year budget?
Depends on the year that the ordinance is adopted. So if it was adopted during the current year, right, it would be 20 to 2021 because our fiscal year ends at the end of June next year. So if it's during that period and there's a request for better or for worse seed money up front to, in essence, establish with the platform, establish with the consultants, get code enforcement, that would happen. There'd be a request to adjust the budget for that fiscal year. Similarly, if it were to be adopted in the subsequent fiscal year, that would be the budget request, if any, during that period. So it really just depends. If it were to be approved by council during the 2021 year, but of this fiscal period, then that's when the request would be made.
And the proposed ordinance is requesting the budget from 2020 to 2021, right now, for now.
Correct, if it were to go in front of them in the coming year, yeah.
And are you relying on the budget approval to start the setup of the online platform and to do the code enforcement and everything else? Definitely, there needs to be the budget to make all those happen. Because if you rely only on I think if it's only with the application fees, that wouldn't cover anything.
Correct. You are correct in that when we present something to the council, part of the fiscal policy that the city has is that we have to provide them with our estimate of what the projected cost of implementation of a policy action. So you're right. When we bring something forward to them, we give them that estimate. And then they appropriate funds. With that said, if our estimates are, for better or for worse, not the final actual numbers based on a year's worth of operation, then part of it is that city staff has to go and update the council and let them know either there were sufficient funds to provide that operation or there were insufficient funds and they need to appropriate more. So that's an ongoing process, both at the initial proposal and then as we monitor any program going forward. So you are correct. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the council is looking at the potential implications of a proposal, in this case, a policy change, both to adopt a new zone code amendment as well as a new program, and what those impacts are going to be to the budget, right? Both from an enforcement standpoint, as well as just the overall maintenance and management of that program.
Thank you. I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Rosati?
Thank you. I just had questions, comments. There seems to be a lot of faith in this code enforcement plan. I guess my question is, how come we didn't have the same effort in protecting the current codes that are on the books now? Why didn't we enforce using the same effort and the same logic our current code. I'm just trying to understand why we would believe that this plan is going to work when right now we have really no enforcement.
And Board Member Rosati, probably the number of code enforcement complaints we've received from short-term rentals surprisingly was very little. It's probably less than a dozen a year. And as the survey showed, the community survey showed many of the neighbors weren't aware that there was a short-term rental happening in their neighborhood. Those that were aware, I suspect that those might have been along the lines of the complaints that we received, or in conjunction with any Burbank PD responses. And you are correct in that we should have had some type of stronger tools for enforcement. But part of the reason is because, again, it's that, the games, if you will, that some of these renters play, knowing that the city doesn't have a ordinance, and they listed their properties without an address. So investigations by code enforcement staff were only with the assistance of the community, that at this address, we suspect, we know that they're operating a short-term rental. And when staff investigated, it was without any reference to business license or anything of that nature that we're proposing now. So we feel...
And they can play the same kind of games, right?
Well,
they can continue to play the same kind of games.
And with that, we have the enforcement tools. Say that the 901st person who operates a short-term rental without a license, we do have the mechanisms because the third party will work with the city in having their address, and we could investigate directly. And we will also, what this ordinance also gives us is third-party enforcement. We will have someone to work evenings and weekends to investigate.
Okay. My second comment is we heard a lot about the positives of this. I really didn't hear much about the negatives, such as the city of Palm Desert. They reversed their short-term rental position on December 31st, 2019, all existing permitted short-term rentals within the R1 and R2 zones to terminate. After that date, all short-term rentals will be prohibited within these two zones. The first citation is $1,000. The second citation is $3,000. It went from $250 fine for the first to $500 to $1,000 to straight to $1,000 the first one. So here you got a community that lends itself to vacation. And if you read some of the stories in the desert communities that have been destroyed because of short-term rentals, the city of Palm Desert actually passed it and then reversed it and increased their enforcement because of what it was doing to their community. But we didn't hear any of these stories or any data on the downside to the community.
And certainly, Board Member Rosati, the board and the community itself, we wouldn't bring this ordinance to you, the community, and certainly the city council if we didn't feel that it had mechanisms to protect the community and the neighborhood. Negatives, might they occur? We wouldn't feel that it would be best practice to bring this forward if it had the negatives, say like Palm Deserts or the beach communities or the college towns. Perhaps just saying it as a side note, I think that's a testament to Burbank itself and our community, and that I think that this has always been known as a very respectful community, and we aim to keep it that way with the regulations. And I think the thing that we've heard from the community meetings is strong regulations to regulate it, control it, and keep it under wraps so that it doesn't turn into something out of control. And we feel that there are mechanisms in place to exactly do that.
If I can add, Board Member Rosati, I just want to acknowledge that we hear where you're coming from. We understand that as we look at this ordinance, and if this ordinance were to go forward in some way, shape, or form, or whatever's recommended to the council, that we need to provide a balanced approach. I think that the staff that's been working on the project has intended to do so. But with saying that, you bring a good point that we should note those cities, if there are out there like Palm Desert or others, that have implemented an ordinance similar to this and then resulted in either removing it or putting further restrictions in place. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, look, I love our city. But I'm not saying that another city like Palm Desert isn't a great city and failed. I mean, I think we should all know that good cities, and I think Palm Desert is a very well-run city. If you look at it online, you look at their budget and everything, they weren't able to put their arms around it. And I think if you're presenting a report, we should know the good, the bad, and the ugly so we can make an informed decision. And there have been cities, if you go online, Santa Monica doesn't have it. There's a few others that they have reversed their decision. And not only did they reverse it, they have tightened up their code enforcement, and at the tune of $5,000, $3,000, $1,000, we can hire 2 or 3 code enforcement guys to crack down on this and pay their salaries and put some money in the coffers instead of the TOT. Anyways, those are my comments.
Ms. Liu, I have a question.
Sure, Board Member Atkinson.
This third-party vendor who has all this great software and algorithm that can identify based on geographic location and pictures and so forth, how long has the city known about the existence of this vendor?
When the city council directed us to look into short-term rentals, at that point, when city council directed us to look at short-term rentals, it was in 2019 or early 2020. I don't have the exact date, but at that point, staff started to do their research to understand this type of evolving industry, and we have listened and from other neighboring cities on how they enforce, and that's how we learned about this third-party vendor, that there is some type of system to be able to identify addresses.
So prior to that, we did not know. How long has this business been in existence? Does anyone know? I don't even know the name of the business, but it doesn't matter. How long have they been in existence?
Chair Atsukenian, they've been in existence, I want to say, since 2012. One of the major companies that we talked to has started operations right around then, which coincidentally comes right around the rise of businesses like Airbnb and VRBO. So there are some newer companies in this business arena, but the larger one has been around since about 2012.
Okay, about 6 to 7 years or 8 years. Okay, thank you.
Any other board members have questions?
I have a question about the maximum number that was noted as 16. And I see that as a comment on the letter that we received before the meeting. How is it calculated? And is there any relation with the maximum number of guests versus the number of bedrooms? So the 16 will be allowed for a studio up to like a 4 or 5 bedroom? If you can please clarify that.
Absolutely, Board Member Hadian. So first of all, the 16 guest cap is just the overall cap that we plan to have for all guests, whether or not they're staying at the short-term rental or just, let's say, guests of the guests. And separate from that, or as sort of like a child from that. We want to have maximum occupancy capped at 2 adults per bedroom plus 2. So that if someone has a 1-bedroom household and they rent out that 1 bedroom, they could have a maximum of 4 adults. If they have a 4-bedroom household and only rent out 2 bedrooms, they could have a maximum of 6 adults. So it's sort of a 2x plus 2, if we all remember our algebra. And that's how and the 16 guest maximum we came by from recent Airbnb regulations, capping the number of guests at their rental.
But I think that's different during the night. So daytime is 16, at night is different, and there's an equation that goes with the number of bedrooms?
No, this would be at any time. There's no difference between daytime and nighttime.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? Yes, Board Member Azadi.
Staff, a question, 2 questions. As it stands right now, if somebody wanted to lease their house out for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, could they legally do that?
Board Member Rosati, 30 days, for 31 days, yes. For 60 days, yes. For 90 days, those time periods would not fall under our regulations. Those would be considered long-term leases or long-term rentals.
And if you're a homeowner, could you rent out a bedroom or 2 bedrooms in your house legally?
I believe that's yes.
Yes.
Yes. So if someone was struggling, such as the COVID cases, which everyone's struggling, currently, you could sign a 31-day lease and lease your house out. Currently, you can rent out 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom of your house to help supplement your income legally.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any of the other board members have questions? Okay, well, Steph, I want to thank you for your report. It was very informative, and you guys have done a great job, I think, taking it to this point. I just have a few questions. In terms of the vendor that you're using, did you already do an RFP with them, or were they sole source? What's the time frame of that?
For the past year, staff has been really looking at this type of industry and the types of vendors that come into play. It is very limited, and we did our research and we've outreached to, I believe it was 7, and we requested a quote from all 7, and we also met with all 7 to get information about the types of services that they provide. We've learned that each vendor has different levels of services in terms of what they provide in relations to short-term rental, and we were looking for a vendor that provided a full encompassing services from addressing the business license, online application, being able to collect the transit occupancy tax, as well as identify these addresses. And so we made sure to get quotes as well as information about each of the vendors that provided us information.
So I guess I'm just trying to figure out a timeline, because it sounds like from if City Council were to go ahead and start taking action in January 12th and they do the 2 readings, we're likely not looking at any type of full implementation until summer. Would you have to do an RFP? Would that also be a part of that time frame?
It would not. When we would go, because we have information from the vendors and meeting our bidding requirements, when we present this information to City Council as a budget amendment, it would also include the professional services agreement that we would be entering into with a vendor to start implementing the regulations. And so within that 90-day period, we would enter into that professional services agreement, set up the online system to make sure that it has all of the application requirements and workflow that the city is looking at. And then at that point, we would start implementation.
And so then, as Mr. Ramirez mentioned, there would be some fiscal impact statements that you would request, like basically City Council to front the money, and you would anticipate breaking even at what like how many registered or how many business licenses would you be thinking that you'll finally break even and cover your costs?
In terms of costs and revenue, we're looking at a full encompassing picture that also includes our transit occupancy tax requirements and anticipating that revenue. With compliance and knowing how the industry works, we're anticipating that at least 350 would respond and register within that first year. And that's how we came up with anticipated revenue that we would receive that first year, which is at $600,000. So that first year, we're anticipating that we would break even and have additional revenue as well within our balance.
Right. I guess I'm just looking at the break even as opposed to actually making money. Because given the COVID situation, I'm just concerned that you may not meet your timeline.
That's correct. We're anticipating it would be within a year, but with COVID into play, that's just something that we definitely have to monitor, and it will impact the cost versus revenue as well.
And then my last question is we heard from several of the people who provided public comment that they wanted more time looking at this. And I know that, like if it's going to City Council, it's not going to go till January 12th. So technically there is about a month that they could keep looking at this and come up with some more feedback. Is it possible for staff to do another community meeting between that time because a hearing is very limited in terms of how they can interact, and it sounds like there's still a lot of questions, and from just the questioning from board members today, there's obviously some more questions about the enforcement piece, which I think is critical. So is there any opportunity to do another community meeting?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Any other board members have questions? Okay, I now declare the hearing closed and the planning board will now deliberate. What is the planning board's pleasure? Anybody want to start?
I can start.
Vice Chair Hadian?
I read the entire, thank you very much to the staff for putting together this report and the proposal for the ordinance, and I read through everything. I read through all comments. The comments to the survey that was posted on Exhibit E5 is about 264 comments, which the 260 are real answers. 123 persons were in favor and 137 were against the ordinance. And the 123 that are in favor, they agree with having regulations in place. And that's exactly, I believe, what city is doing when we're asking the so what and why do we even think about passing an ordinance for short-term rentals. We have to think about the number of properties and the revenue that the city is losing. I'm totally against the short-term rentals and how they're changing the texture of a city like Burbank. But this is what has happened to Pasadena and to West Hollywood and to many other cities. they banned it, and then they had to come back and deal with it. And that's exactly where we are. Right now, per the reports, we have 500 operating without permit that pay the tax to platform and let's say Airbnb, and 0 to the city. Let's say if the short-term rental passes, up to 900 can obtain permit and will be licensed. They will pay the fee and they will pay the tax, the TOT tax to the city. So that's the regulation in place, and that's the tax revenue for the city. And there are those people that never will obtain any permit. They will operate illegally. And those that stay out of the 900 cap permit, those people will probably continue to operate without license and without permit, which is not good. And I believe that city is putting the 900 cap for the license in place. So a lot of people that are against this ordinance don't think that we're exploding the city with licenses. But let's be realistic. It is happening. People are renting their properties as short-term rental, and city is not getting anything out of this. And the more that we wait on this, I believe the revenue and the opportunities goes to the neighboring cities. Let's look at Exhibit C1. There is the survey of the neighboring cities and the short-term programs, although there are like 6-7 cities, but only 3 will really apply to us, which are Glendale, Los Angeles, and Pasadena as neighboring cities, because Beverly Hills, Palm Springs, Santa Monica, West Hollywood are way too far from Burbank, and they will not absorb the tenants of the short-term rental. And I think the key performance indicators for an accurate comparison will be the days to rent, and if it's a vacation versus home, what is it called? The vacation versus, there is the other...
home sharing.
Home share. And the presence of the owner, and then there is the other items that they need, like the registration, tax, or city fees. We put all that together, we see that Glendale has no limit and allows no vacation rentals. Los Angeles allows 120 days. You can either rent as vacation or home share, and no requirement for the owner to be present. And then Pasadena, 9 months, and the vacation rentals okay, and 90 days 90 days cap on the number of days per year that they can rent their properties. So we have to be compatible with what they have. Now that we're going through this ordinance, let's look into the main parameters and the factors that play a big role. One of the most important factors is the code enforcement, and as everyone looked at it, it needs more review. I did a little bit of calculation on the revenue. Let's say for the 500 properties, and if they're rented at the 120 days max at $130 per night, which is usually not the full 120 days, we will get 15,600. And 500 properties times 15,600 will be about $7.8 million, the total rent collected. 10% of that 7.8 will be about 780,000. That's the maximum, but let's say that 50% of the time is being rented, which brings us to about 390,000 for the TOT tax for city per year. And then there is a revenue generated from the one-time application form, 285.30, and then the license fee, 201.05, 486.30, times 500 units, 243,150. Then there is the budget allocation from the city, 225,500. Add that to the 10% tax, will get to 858,650, almost 900,000. Then on the budget allocation, we have, we looked at it, we have the code enforcement, we have the staff, the administration, and we have other overheads. I don't believe that even if the entire 900 properties are rented at 120 days, will offset the cost that it involves for code enforcement. But let's say if you don't do that and just stay out of this and say no, then the 900 or let's say 1,000 of the permits that we have, plus the 900 permits that we have and the 1,000 other that are renting illegally will be about 2,000 units that rent annually, and 2,000 will be 4 times of the revenue that we could generate, which is 4 times of the 7.8 million. So we have to proceed with having an ordinance in place, and what we're doing right now is just looking at how to have restrictions and regulations. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Board Member Rosati.
I believe our city thrives when people plant roots, both homeowners and tenants. You heard from one of the callers who's involved in this industry, and he said it's $1 billion industry. I don't want any part of it. I don't care about the money. We keep chipping away at our single-family neighborhoods and turning them into something different than what they're zoned for. And we're actually changing the zones. We have hotels that are zoned for short-term rentals. That's what they're there for. R1 neighborhoods were zoned for R1 neighborhoods. I'm not for turning our residential neighborhoods into multifamily or businesses. We need more. We keep saying that we need more housing. We've heard that for the last 3 years. We need more housing. But yet, at every turn, this board and our council keeps taking away housing and giving it to investors. Because really, it's the investors that are the ones that are going to win. If you can rent out a house for $130 a night, take a look at the cost, the mortgage, and the profit. So we keep taking away the housing from, I was working with a gal for 4 months trying to find her a house to rent in Burbank. Why? It's because of this kind of nonsense. There's a scarcity of homes, and yet we keep taking it away. And I keep saying this over and over to this board and our council, and yet no one seems to understand, but yet we keep voting to keep taking it away. When are we going to take a stand and say we're going to protect our single family homes, who, by the way, are paying $9,000 a year in taxes for a house that's only $700,000. And by the way, good luck trying to find a house for $700,000. And you're paying $9,000 a year to live next to, we don't know. The question is, do we want to be a transient community where people come and go and we no longer know who our neighbors are? Every day it's someone new with a different set of circumstances. Heck, we can just leave our trash on the lawn because the janitor is going to pick it up because we're just here for the weekend. There's no commitment to the community that way. And let's think about this from a real estate aspect. because all of us are in this real estate game, right? We bought homes in Burbank. So let's do a little bit of analysis. We bought our homes. We're in it for 30 years. You paid your taxes. We were great members of the community. We served on the planning board. We served on the transportation committee. And now time has gone by. We may have to be in assisted living, or we may have to move out of state to live with family members. So we want to go sell our house for $800, $900, $1 million. But what? Guess what? Now we have to disclose, by the way, there's a business operating right next door, and it's a transient business where people come and go. Well, how many takers, how many buyers you think are going to say, sign me up for that? I don't think so. I know personally, if I got that disclosure, I'm not a buyer. Off to the next one. And then staff draws the parallel. Well, people operate home businesses every day, right? Aunt B and her piano lessons. But the difference between Aunt B and the piano lessons is Aunt B lives there. I know Aunt B. I bring her cookies. She brings me soup. Airbnb, I don't know who they are. They ain't bringing me cookies. They ain't bringing me soup. They're bringing me headaches.
And getting 10% of the tax.
I don't care, Hadian, about the money. I'm not selling out my community for money. And if we really did a good job in enforcement and charged $1,000, $2,000 in fines, we would make more in that than TOT. But I'm not selling out my community for money. $500,000 to our budget is nothing compared to our neighborhood. And everything's pretty cool, right? Hip, cool today until it's happening next door to you. And then all of a sudden, you have someone coming in your community next door to you every day. It's a different person, a different set of circumstances. You have 3 kids. You're afraid of pedophiles. You're afraid of theft and crime. But now we've become a transient community. I said it before and I'll say it again. I don't think this was a very balanced report because you have cities like Palm Desert that are repealing their decision. Here's another point. And I made it clearly. If you want to rent out a room in your house, you can do it legally. If you want to rent out 2 rooms in your house, you can do it legally. If you want to rent out your house for 31 days, you can do it legally. What's wrong with that? It's a single family neighborhood. Why not? But keeping the existing laws in place at least gives the homeowner who is having a problem with this a chance for enforcement. But by allowing it, you know what that homeowner is going to do? He's going to call Rosati, and Rosati's going to have to sell his house because I can tell you right now, he's not going to want to deal with the constant day in, day out of this nuisance. And that's what it is. It's the nuisance. You know, I've always loved this city. And people move here and they tell me why they move here. It's not because we never used to follow other cities. We used to pave our own way. And we used to be exceptional. Let's be exceptional. Let's set the standard. Let's not follow the standard. We don't follow, we lead. I don't want to hear about what Pasadena does or what Glendale does or what the city of LA does. If you don't like Burbank the way it is, then move to the cities that have these things that you like. but don't change the rules on the homeowners midstream. They bought their house 2 years ago. Midstream, we're going to change the zoning in your neighborhood. How's that fair to the homeowner? I mean, a couple of callers called in and said, guys, help us. You're put in this position to protect us. Think about what you're doing. And you're changing the rules on these poor homeowners midstream, changing the zoning on their property midstream. And again, put yourself in the position. Is this something that you would want right next door to you? And then again, you're going to have to disclose it. I think, changing the zone on something is forever. And then trying to change it back. I mean, honestly, do you think, how many cities are like Palm Desert and say, you know what, we made a mistake. We made a mistake. Let's reverse it. I think reversing it would be too hard. It's the barn doors open and the cows are out. Let's protect our city. Let's be exceptional. Let's not be followers. Let's be leaders. I don't care if we're losing out on the money. I care that we enforce the rules. And I think we can hire enforcement. We can hire the same company to generate the same revenue if they enforce the rules. And my point in all those questions to staff was, you're so positive about this enforcement capability, but where was it? Let's see the staff report. I would like to see the staff put effort in a report enforcing the rules. The same effort they put in this. This is so important. And I love each and every one of you. I've lived in this town since 1967, and I'm asking you to think about what you're doing, because forever you're changing our communities with these Airbnbs and with these short-term rentals and with these ADUs. You're chipping away at the American dream. You're chipping away at our single-family neighborhoods. You're chipping away of the roots of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Rosati. Who would like to speak next? Board Member Gamboa.
I'd like to just first thank staff for, putting together this ordinance. I think you had to thread a lot of needles to try to tackle all the different issues that have come up, both from the comments, the letters we received, the phone calls, the board members here. I think there's a lot of compelling arguments on both sides. And I think you drafted something that addressed a lot of those issues, which is commendable. And I think it's a good document in general. However, I think, there's a lot of points Board Member Rosati made that I would agree with. And normally him and I don't always see eye to eye on some of these issues, but I think the heart of this issue is the same. And we have space for people to live, and this has a chance to remove this place for people to live, and it turns into a place for people just to kind of visit. And it changes the way that people are using homes that are meant for people to live. And there's people who don't have a place to live or a stable place to live. And then you can still rent out your ADUs, you can rent out your JDUs, you can rent out your rooms for people for those, 30, 60 days. So, but also at the same time, people are hurting right now. And there's lots of compelling reasons to allow something like this, because people got used to this system. But, I've stayed in my fair share of Airbnbs, and I, know how an absentee landlord can probably be viewed in the neighborhood. I know how how it could get out of hand for people who live in those places or people who visit those places with the neighbors. So there's lots of competing challenges there, and I think it's a tough spot for everyone, especially given this time, because it's an easy kind of revenue stream for folks. But just like kind of how Lyft and Uber are taxis without regulation, this is a hotel without regulation. And if I said it in our workshop when we first brought this here, is that if you want to own a hotel, own a hotel. But if you want to have a place for someone to live, you can have a place for someone to live. So it's one of those kind of tougher. We've had tough decisions, I think, here with some individual families, but this is a kind of a tough decision because it affects the city on both sides of it. And so, I think I appreciate all the work in the staff report and all the comments from the board and everyone as we consider this. So. Thank you for this tonight, and hopefully we can come to a good resolution on our part.
Thank you, Board Member Gamboa. Board Member Atikinian, did you want to speak now?
Sure, I can go now. It's not easy for anyone involved here, whether it be staff, citizenry, planning board, city council. This is a tough issue to deal with. I mean, there are reasons why it's called planning. Planning is responsible for zoning. We have different zones for different type of uses. People create in the cities different districts: commercial district, residential district, industrial district. There's a reason why that it's set up that way. Let's say, for the sake of discussion, we don't have these zonings. So we have, let's say, a barber shop next to a house, which is next to a meat grinding business, which is next to let's say, a farmer, which is next to a metal fabrication. It just doesn't work that way. What this does is basically mix everything. Now we don't have any differentiation between residential and commercial. They're interchangeable. And I was going to make the point, but I think he read my mind. Mr. Rosati said, in all the other businesses that people conduct out of their homes, the property owner is there, or the person who has rented that place to live there is there. They have a vested interest. They have rules, regulations, guidelines. They have a contract in place that they need to follow. It's a tough situation. I mean, look at the disclosure. Why should there be disclosure? Because it's an adverse impact on the neighbors. That's why they require you to disclose it. It's not because, oh, look, there's a business next to you. Why don't you come and rent this place or buy this place? No, because people look at this adversely. That's why they need to be informed that there is such a place. Otherwise, they're going to get sued after the purchase goes through. So, I brought up the enforcement. I didn't know it was going to catch fire like that, but here's the situation. The reason why people don't have confidence in what's going to come in the future is because people are looking in the past. And in the past, they've looked and said all these businesses are operating, and there was no enforcement of shutting them down or telling them, hey, you can't do this here because it's not allowed. Neighbors complaining, some of them went unanswered, some of them were perhaps addressed. So I like to know what happened to those neighbors who complained and someone responded to the location, and what did they do about shutting that place down when they were operating illegally? What happened in those instances? In the report it says about we had very few complaints, 19, and another year 20-something, I think, if I recall correctly. So what happened to those 19 locations that were illegally operating? Were they shut down? So if they were not, that's why people don't have confidence in what we're putting forth or what's being put forth. good intentions, they don't make for good results. And I don't think there's a lot of good intentions here. I like the fact that maybe bringing them into compliance, better regulations, perhaps will give us better results, perhaps some additional funding. But let's take a look at some extreme examples. If everybody was out stealing, should we try and just regulate stealing and collect taxes from the thieves? So it's a slippery slope. I don't think the argument fares well here, as far as, and it makes no sense. ADUs were basically put in by the state, and everyone had to follow ADUs because the state mandated it. No one had the power. This is our own. We have the ability to own this and basically make decisions about this. It is our decision to make, not someone else's decision that we need to follow. So in that regard, I think we need to make the right decision. I'm not for regulating single family residences. I'm not for infringing more regulations on people who own property. Property rights are very important to me. But at the same time, there needs to be a balance. Don't we already regulate property rights? Can anyone have a party at 12 midnight and disturb all their neighbors? They are doing it on their property, but obviously they can't do that because it's disturbing their neighbors. This is even beyond that. We're not disturbing neighbors. We're going to disturb the entire city of Burbank with, let's say, 900 businesses out there that could operate as businesses embedded within single-family residences. And as far as the apartments, how's that any different than a hotel? How is that operation any different than a hotel? Why don't they just go rent a hotel instead of going and living in an apartment? Perhaps it's cheaper. Perhaps now they get to do what they want to do without any detection or without any enforcement. So there's a lot of things going on here that's not clear on its face, and it requires further study and further looking into. And the cost, and my other concern is the cost. The city may set up something and try and capture some revenue, but my concern here is that the cost of running this program is far going to outweigh the revenue that it's going to generate. And as far as revenue, should everything be revenue driven in terms of, can we justify everything because it may bring in more money to the city? Do we not have other means of bringing money to the city? Or can we just do the opposite? Perhaps exercise more fiscal responsibility in spending? And how do we know if this is capped at 900? Let's just, for sake of discussion, let's just do the simple math, theoretical math. Capped at 900, but yet costs increase every year. The vendor the next year will charge more for the contract. City employees are going to get their raises or get their step increases. Now they're more burden on the budget. When I say burden, I mean it costs more for that individual to work at the city. So as costs grow, how is this growing when it's capped at 900? Now, if it's not capped at 900, what's going to happen? All right, we need 1,800. No, we need 2,400. Where does it end? So, for all these reasons, I'm like I said, everyone's trying to get a handle on this and trying to get pieces and parts from different places. And I want to mention, let's not forget the parents. You know, on the lighter side, all these kids going out and partying in this and that, destroying the place, and the parents getting stuck with the bill. I mean, let's face it. Let's try and save the parents too from all this. I know it doesn't make sense to all of you, but I had a personal friend who had an experience about this, and I was talking to regarding this, and they don't live in the city of Burbank or anything like that. But anyway, they're forget it. I'm going to self-certification is another issue. So they're going, who knows the picture, they're going to be sending in pictures. What if it's the pictures of their neighbor's house? Okay. So there's a lot of problems with this, and I don't think a $500,000 is not a money large enough for someone to say it's a good business decision to try and pony up taxpayer dollars to try and get this program going, and then find out that it's not going. Who's going to be the first one standing up and admitting that, you know what, this didn't work, so now we're going to try and reverse it? So what do you do to all those people who have vested interest, who filed for the business license, who, let's say, did modifications, did advertisement, or spent money? What happens to those individuals who try to rely on this thing? And as far as the outside vendor goes, if the city would have been able to find out that there was this type of vendors out there who can find out where these people are marketing or the houses, why wasn't this undertaken for enforcement earlier? Why didn't the city, when it's illegal to do this type of business, why didn't the city 5 years ago say, you know what, we're going to try and crack down on these short-term rentals because we're getting complaints and we don't really want to create a problem in the neighborhood. So let's get this outside vendor to identify these homes. Let's contact Airbnb and the other vendors, say, listen, these houses with these addresses, they're not supposed to be renting. So if they try and go through your service, ask them where their address is. And if it's in Burbank, don't do it. Or send letters out to them once the properties are identified. You are operating a short-term rental business, and it is illegal to operate such a business in the city of Burbank. And we're going to be held accountable for it. None of it was done. But yet, we're hopeful that if an ordinance is passed, that it's going to get done. But I think it's just the opposite. Right now, because people know that it's illegal to operate a business like this in the city of Burbank, they are on their best behavior. They will do everything possible not to be exposed, not to be found out. It's an underground economy. But when you put a regulation or ordinances in place, then everybody is now has a platform. They have a right. There are regulations. I'm complying with your regulations. You can't find me. I'm going to appeal this. I'm going to sue that. I'm going to file that claim. So can you imagine what the expenditure or the exposure is as far as what it's going to cost the city to manage something like this? Appeals, processes, reports, staff time, contractor time, and so forth and so on. I think that's probably enough for one night. So overall, the concept may be appealing. The fact that it may generate some revenue may be appealing. But I think there's enough problems here with what we're trying to put our hands around, that all those things do not outweigh the detriment or the problems that a program such as like this one is going to cause, not to mention the intrinsic costs of a program like this, where neighbors against each other. One unit will affect at least 4 around them. So it's not, the 900 is not really 900, it's really 3,600. That's what you're looking at. So one house will affect 4 at least around, not to mention perhaps the entire street, if depending on what goes on there. No one is trying to blow this out of proportion, but I think fiscally it doesn't make sense. The numbers don't make sense. Community-wise, I don't think it makes sense to try and dismantle the families and the single-family neighborhood. With the ADUs already did some of that, and now on top of it, we're going to start promoting this type of a thing. I think if the program, if it stays as is, then all those people will be afraid. And I think if the police, and not the police, but I mean the city enforcement enforces these type the lawlessness, or I mean maybe that's an extreme, enforces the code and says, listen, you are not allowed to have this type of a business here, and we've had complaints, so you need to shut it down or you're going to be fined, and here's the fine. Next complaint, you're going to be fined. I think they'll solve the problem, and the $500,000 is no guarantee that the city is going to be getting anything out of it other than headache, and it's going to cost the taxpayers even more money. With the budget the way it is, I don't see a justification for it. It was kind of long-winded. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Board Member Atakinian. This is a very interesting subject for me, only because I actually had a neighbor 2 houses down from me run an Airbnb out of their home, and most of the neighborhood had no idea for about 6 months, and then somebody kind of noticed, but it was just done so well that it didn't really bother the neighborhood. In fact, I have, other long-term neighbors that, I would rather not see and keep those Airbnb folks. But I understand, Board Member Rosati, your position in terms of what homeowners want, but you are speaking for one group of homeowners. And as we have seen from the survey and some of the public comment, there is yet another group of homeowners that we need to consider as well. And those are the ones that do want such a regulation. And I think that staff, I know you brought up the Palm Springs issue, and I think, staff probably made a logical choice based on the fact that for the past several years, we've had 400 to 500 of these running underground and less than a dozen complaints each year. So they made a logical decision in saying that it's probably not going to be more like the Palm Springs example. And that what we want to do is to create, I think, enough revenue. I'm not looking like in terms of making money. That's why I was asking, can you make enough revenue to actually make a legitimate regulations to cover those that are doing this and to create some money for enforcement. So I do think that some of the numbers are not there yet, at least for me, to be comfortable. I would want to make this type of regulation very narrow. I mean, I don't even know if I to do 900. Can we start with 500 and see if that even works before we go up to a higher number like that? And so I am supportive, by Chair Hadian, in terms of having regulation, because I do think that we need it, but not sure in terms of the actual number of business licenses, whether we need to be that high, whether we kind of slow roll this in. And I do think that there definitely needs to be more community input on this version of, or this actually the version, because you guys have been working on it and this is presenting it now, to let them understand a little better of what's going on. And it's my understanding too that investment companies, they can't do this. They can't buy businesses or property and do this because they're not the primary owner, which they have to. The owner's got to be there, which is why they had so many different examples in terms of in the presentation of who could actually partake in this. So that situation that you brought up, Board Member Rosati, I don't think would apply to these regulations. In fact, it prevents it from happening because we would have regulations that would stop it. Yeah, Board Member Rosati.
So, good luck with that. We really can't enforce what we currently have, and how is it that we're going to be able to enforce who the owner of the property is. You could say, well, we'll get a utility bill in his name. That's easy to do. Just get a utility bill in your name. So there's all kinds of ways around it when you're involved in a billion-dollar industry. But I want to go back to my point. If you want to rent out a bedroom in your house, or 2 bedrooms in your house, or 3 bedrooms in your house, you're legally allowed to. If you want to rent out your house for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you're legally allowed to. But you're talking about changing the zoning. And you have this willy-nilly survey. Well, let's do a real survey. Let's send out a survey to every residential homeowner in the city of Burbank and ask this question, instead of just a handful of people that we don't even know who they are or who filled out the survey. I didn't fill out the survey. My wife didn't fill out the survey. So my brother didn't fill out the survey. So surveys, again, I think we need to be cognizant of our residential neighborhoods, of what potentially we're doing to our community. And it wasn't that long ago when every single one of us said, we really, really want to protect our neighborhood. What was the slogan? The planning board, the slogan was, the planning board is not on board with ADUs, but we had to vote for it because we're handcuffed by the city. And here we are in a very similar situation to protect our residential neighborhoods. And we all said that we really wanted to protect them, but we couldn't. And now we're all reversing that course. Some of us are reversing that course. And I find that interesting because it's the same issue. We're changing our single family home guidelines. And we all said it. I was at that meeting. We really do want to protect the community, but we can't. Tukanian, what was your slogan?
I don't quite remember at this point. You put me on a tough spot.
It was the planning board is not on board with ADUs.
I think
that was the slogan.
I think it was something like that. Yes, there was some rhyming going on in there somewhere.
Yeah, but we all said, "Oh, I voted no. You guys voted yes because you felt that we had to go with what the state requirements were." Well, now, like Atukanian said, we're free to make our own decision. We're free to protect our city and our residential neighborhoods. And you know what? If you want to stay in a hotel, there's a bunch of them. Us as a body have approved 5 since I've been on the planning board. And why would we have to take away from them? They have a very good facility and they're zoned for it. So I don't understand why we would do that to our Burbank homeowners. Why would we change the rules on somebody that purchased their home 3 years ago and now all of a sudden they got this disaster living next door to them? That's not fair. And we have the ability to say, we want to be exceptional. We don't care about Glendale or Pasadena. We are Burbank. We're exceptional. When I grew up in this city, we made our own rules. When we passed the smoking ban ordinance, one of the strictest in the nation, we made our own rules. We didn't do it because Pasadena did it. We didn't do it because Santa Monica did it. But you know what? We passed the rule, and guess what? Everyone in the nation followed us. San Francisco, Santa Monica, Pasadena. We set our own course because we are exceptional. And I think we have to start looking at ourselves as being exceptional, and instead of following, leading. This is not good for our community. We all know it's not good for our community. And for $500,000, which net is maybe $100 after we pay this company that's going to regulate regulate for us? Come on, guys. You heard the callers. Please.
Chair Lou, if I may.
Please.
I don't want to be misunderstood that I'm not in favor of some regulations, but I think we don't have the mechanisms or the correct mechanism in place. I mean, just for an example, I don't think I would be able to support something that limited to 120 days, maybe 90 days. I don't think I would be able to support anything that the owner of the property is not there while these people are there at the same time. These the short-term rental people. So I think that if the owner of the property is on the property itself, then perhaps it may be more palatable. It may give a little bit more confidence and comfort to the neighbors and the neighborhoods, because the place is going to be taken care of, and the owner is not going to and law enforcement responds differently to property owners than they do to renters. I think not most times, but in some instances, because there's an inherent vested interest in the actual property that you're on. You have certain rights as the owner of the property. Occupancy limits are kind of vague. I think it should be very clear. I don't know what it means. Limit 2 adults per bedroom plus 2. To some it may be clear, but it's not clear to me. No more than 16 people. And I like the quotation. It's consistent with what Airbnb does. Who cares? So all in all, I think, again, the offenses and the fines that are going to be that are proposed here, I was going to question, but I neglected to question whether there would be, if this is would be listed as a criminal offense, or are these only civil fines, or if it's combination. But since I do not see 6 months in jail next to $1,000 offense, I'm going to assume these are all civil fines. And civil fines, let's try and visit that very quickly. City fines a homeowner, property owner, for not illegally operating, but not following the rules, and they fine them $5,000. Okay, well, what usually is going to happen? You're either going to end up going to a court later, or it's going to get settled. All right, well, $5,000. Okay, that's too much. Okay, what's a reasonable thing? Okay, pay me $1,200 and we'll close the file. So we know how that goes. That part works. So that's not a comfort. And I think when I look at the map, that's Exhibit D1. Down there's listed TripAdvisor owned, Priceline owned, Expedia owned. So obviously there's these corporations who have houses here that they've purchased and they're running this business already. So you put in the regulation, what stops them from coming in and buying more houses and running more businesses like this? Right now it's illegal, and we know that it's illegal. We know who owns it, but we don't even enforce the fact that they can't do this here. So why would any citizen have any confidence in what's coming forward? Would anyone have? I mean, I don't want this point to be lost. When you look at what may happen in the future, we look at what has happened in the past conduct. And if we fail to tell people, you're not allowed to do this here, and I wonder why we failed to do that. Was it because there wasn't sufficient resources to go after these type of infringements? Obviously, if we are starting to enforce something like this, then that's going to take away from police officers who are going to go out, or code enforcement officers who are going to go out. Now, are they going to go out and enforce something like this versus an illegal structure? So now we start balancing. We don't have sufficient resources. So we're going to direct resources where it's going to benefit the citizens most. I'm hoping that's what the philosophy or the approach is. So these are low-level things. So we don't need to enforce it. It's okay. It goes on. So that's why the people don't have confidence in this. And perhaps Another thing I would suggest for consideration is the 900 applications were either maybe perhaps do a zone where this could be done close to where the studios are. If this is most of the stays, people coming in here and living for a short time to work at the studios and go back to their homes. Let's say if they live in other states, maybe just a quarter of a mile just around the studios. Maybe that may be another approach where enforcement would be easier too. You're not covering the entire city. But no matter how you slice it or dice it, I think it affects the fabric of the community, and this community is a family-based community, proud homeowners who take care of their properties, 98% of them anyway. And I think that tradition is basically not being observed here. I don't think the lure of an extra $100,000 or even $300,000 or even $500,000 is enough to tell everyone in the community, well, you got ADUs, next door neighbors building ADUs, investors are coming in, building ADUs, flipping properties and so forth and so on, renting them out. Now a single family is 3 units. Now we're gonna add short-term rentals to that list. And who knows what we'll be adding next year or the year after that. Perhaps a way to alleviate that is, say, not in R1 zones. So, as Mr. Rosati pointed out, you can rent it out for 31 days, 60 days, 90 days. And why is it that the ADUs have a 90-day limitation on them or restriction? Why is that? Because people don't want short-term rentals next to them. Property owners, the owner who lives in the house doesn't want to deal with that revolving door, perhaps. So these are all considerations. I think I'm sure the council will take up, and I'm sure perhaps more deliberation is necessary and required. And at the end of the day, if we're going to be conducting business here, this makes no business sense to be delving into this type of an endeavor where we don't even know what the actual cost of the endeavor is. And the city, the only way it's going to find out is put up at least $500,000 up front to try and get a program going that doesn't even know what the revenues are. Thank you.
Board Member Atakinian, I didn't know, did you want to put some of your suggestions in the form of a motion?
I think at this time, I think it would be premature for me because, and the reason why I say that is because I don't want to set forth those. I think I just want those suggestions as consideration, because my position on this is I wouldn't be able to support the resolution as drafted, and I don't think the few suggestions that I make are complete. So that's why I don't feel comfortable putting it in a motion. And it's going to open up a door for further discussion. So I just want to put it out there for the idea being what we have here may be a starting point. It may get to a finish. It may not get to a finish. But the form that we have it in right now, there's a great deal of issues that needs to be considered before it's finalized.
Thank you. Board Member Gamboa, was your hand? Did your hand go up? I wasn't sure.
No.
Okay. Board Member Rosati?
I'd like to make a motion. I recommend that we decline staff's recommendation for a resolution of the Planning Board of the City of Burbank recommending the City Council adopt an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Burbank amending the zone definitions in Section 10-1203 and the land use tables for R1, R1H, R2, R3, and R4 as noted in Sections 10-1-602 and 10-1-627, and adding Article 28 to Chapter 4 of the Title 3 of the Burbank Municipal Code to allow short-term rentals.
Mr. Rosati, I'm sorry, before we actually respond to that, you changed the resolution to declining the resolution?
I did.
Okay.
My motion was to decline staff's recommendation to council.
Okay, I have something to add before we actually get to the resolution or the motion. Can I add that, Chair Liu?
Just for discussion purposes, I'm going to second that. Just so you can move on, Vice Chair Hadian, if you wanted to make a motion for an amendment.
Yes, the motion for amendment to include at least one or two additional community meeting, new survey to be sent out to the residents, defined cost analysis with accurate numbers, and the status of the 900 licenses for those that are not active, and the status of like the wait list or registration, clarification on the 900 licenses.
I don't accept that amendment.
I'm actually going to second that amendment, and then we can vote it. And if you don't accept it, you can vote it down.
I made the motion, and I believe I'm the one that has the right to accept a friendly amendment or decline it. All I'm saying is, let's vote on one thing at a time. Let's vote on mine, and then if she wants to make a motion to go back and redo this, we can do that. But I made the motion, and I'm not accepting that amendment. We can make another motion after we vote on my motion.
Mr. McMillan, my understanding is that if I second Vice Chair Hadian's amendment, we would just vote on that, and if it fails, and it fails, and then we go to Mr. Rosati's motion.
Chair Liu, that's correct. I want to make sure that I heard Vice Chair Hadian and that she made a motion, because I agree with Board Member Rosati that if she was looking to make an amendment off of his emotion, then it'd be a different procedure. But so long as Hadian's was actually a motion, then you are correct, Chair Liu.
I believe it was an amendment, but if it was a motion, fine.
Let's do it again. So I'm going to make a motion for the resolution with amendments. Does that work, Chair Liu? Let's just
you would just do a motion of what you wanted to see in terms of the community meetings, and then the other items that you want to see done. And then I could second that, and then we would vote on it.
So as Board Member Atagunian said, this is the start point. And the resolution actually moves this forward for more study, more research, and we're making recommendation to the City Council. And from here, until it's heard by City Council, we can just include more items to make it more clear that what's the short-term rental, and if it's being approved. At this time, we're just moving forward with approving the resolution to make the recommendations to the City Council. And I'm in agreement with that, conditional, based on the conditions that I mentioned.
Mr. McMillan, would you rather, it sounds like Vice Chair Hadian wants to actually make an amendment to Board Member Rosati's motion. Should we now take Board Member Rosati's motion first then, and then Vice Chair Hadian could then put different conditions?
Yes.
As another motion. Okay. Is there, so Vice Chair Hadian, we're going to take Board Member Rosati's motion to decline or reject the staff's motion in the report, and then we can come back to what we would like to happen, and you can go ahead and make your motion at that point.
I second Mr. Rosati's.
I already seconded it.
Oh,
so
you already seconded? I thought you seconded. I thought you seconded Ms.
For
Hadian's.
discussion purposes, but
All right.
Or if you can just whatever is the motion and is being seconded, would you please repeat so we know what we're actually voting on?
Sure. Board Member Rosati, did you want to repeat?
We are declining staff's recommendation. That I'm not going to read it again, but we're declining staff's recommendation to City Council to allow Airbnbs in R1 neighborhoods and changing the zone text amendment. If you look at staff's recommendation that I just read, we're declining it.
Did you have any other questions about that, Vice Chair Hadian?
No, if we're doing a roll call on that, then do we do a roll call? Then?
Yes, I'll take a vote right now. Board
Yeah,
member.
I'm sorry, before you do the vote, did anyone have any other comments? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Board member Gamboa.
Yes.
Board member Rosati.
Yes.
Board member Altakunian.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hadian.
No.
Chair Liu.
No.
Motion passes.
Sorry, yes, motion passes. Vice Chair Hadian, did you want to make a motion as to what you would like to see the staff do at this point to recommend to City Council?
Yes, the resolution as it is on the resolution Exhibit A1 and amended to include the conditions for 1 or 2 additional community meetings, new survey to be sent out to all residents for being in agreement or in or opposed to the short-term rentals, defined cost analysis with accurate numbers, and the status of the 900 licenses and the distribution and the inactive licenses. These are the amendments that I think, plus the other comments such as the owner to be present and the number of occupants to relate with the number of the bedrooms. And these are the amendments that I'm proposing. But passing it to be heard by the council, and in the meantime, those works be done. Just declining it and not agreeing with it is waste of the staff and the planning department resources. This will come back. So at least making it a better resolution is better than just declining it.
I second your motion. Is there any discussion on this?
I believe it's already been declined, and it's up to staff to come back and retool it and bring it back. I don't think we need a motion to direct staff. It's up to staff it's up to them if they want to retool it and bring it back. It's already been declined.
I think your motion was declining the resolution that
Correct.
we're looking at right now. My motion was the same resolution amended. So your decline on this resolution got 3-2.
We only have one resolution in front of us tonight. That we had a public meeting with public notice with only one resolution in front of us, and we declined that resolution.
I leave it
Mr.
up to the
McMillan,
chair.
can you clarify? My understanding is that Vice Chair Hadian can make another resolution that is related to the one that staff presented.
So my understanding from, and maybe I misunderstood Vice Chair Hadian, my understanding was she was looking to make work off of Board Member Rosati's recommendation, but add on to it requirements to set up community meetings and get more information gathering. But if this is a motion to approve the resolution but add those community meetings, I mean, this was already voted on. We denied the resolution.
No, that's not. She wants to reject the motion and add on these conditions. So we've already rejected the motion. So she's basically saying, can we add on these, like put these conditions forward for staff? So instructions to staff to do this. Do we need a motion for that, or can we just provide instructions?
Let's do a motion. If it's seconded, just to be clear, if it's seconded, then put it to a vote, roll call vote, and see if it stands or not.
Chair Lou,
Yes.
if I may, I think that's just going to create confusion as to what happened and what is going to happen. The resolution as presented to us, we've heard discussions and arguments, and we just voted right now that we do not wish to send this resolution to City Council for consideration. So now, right now, it's vacant. There is no resolution. That's the way I think it is. There's no resolution. So if we're trying to amend the resolution or to try and change the resolution, how can we do that to something that's non-existent? It's no longer there. It's no longer going to go to City Council. We've rejected it, the staff recommendation. And so making amendments at this point to something that's been rejected, I'm not sure how that's going to be treated. I think it's just going to create confusion that we didn't know what we were voting on. We knew what I was voting on. I was voting on rejecting what the recommendation was. And once the recommendation is rejected, then there's nothing to do anything more on it other than if we do have some comments regarding, some future direction or sort of guidance or suggestions to staff, then of course we're able to do that. We can suggest, since we've rejected the resolution as it stands now, they don't have anything to take to City Council. Our suggestion would be between now and then, or maybe later, perhaps conduct additional, as Vice Chair Hadian suggested, conduct additional hearings, meetings, maybe in your future resolution or review or report, bring us one that contains some of these suggestions that she's made. So I think that's where we're at. I don't think we can go back. It's the current resolution as we have in front of us is over. It's rejected. It's done. So we can't. Once it's done, we can't have changes to it. That's what I'm trying. That's what I'm trying to. It gets confusing.
Understand, Vice Chair Hadian.
I'm sorry, just to remove the confusions, I have a question for Mr. Macmillan. Can we vacate what was voted and do a renewal and redo the resolution and the voting on this resolution only?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Macmillan, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about my Robert's Rules of Order. Like the way that we've always done it is we vote, Vice Chair Hadian had this amendment, and typically we vote on the amendment, and if the amendment fails, then we vote on the motion.
But I said I was not willing to accept the amendment, and then
But that's not how she wasn't making a friendly amendment. She was making an amendment, and the body votes it up and down. It's not you who decides.
As the maker of the motion, I didn't accept it, and that's when you said, no, she made a standalone motion.
Well, the motion that you stated was also altered because you made the motion on rejecting the resolution. We usually read the resolution, and those in favor are yes, those against it are no. But then I added amendments to make it a better resolution. So let's just be fair to the audience, everyone who's listening to this hearing. Whomever wants to do any vote in support or against this resolution, let's do it once. If legally we're allowed to do so, if there is any way, Mr. Macmillan, I do appreciate. Let's do just one vote one time on the resolution that's proposed, because this is the notice and this is the resolution that is sent out to the residents.
I made a motion rejecting staff's.
Right. Board Member Rosati, can we just hear from Mr. Macmillan in terms of how do we, the intent when we did the vote was to have Vice Chair Hadian present some instructions to staff. Now, if it's instructions to staff, we don't need to make a motion, then she can just do the instructions to staff. If you think that we need to make the motion, then how do we do it?
So I think there's some confusion on what I understood Vice Chair Hadian looking to do. Just to answer the question about vacating or reconsidering, that would require a majority. That would require somebody in the majority approval for Board Member Rosati's motion to vote with those that opposed it, to have a reconsideration of that vote.
Right. But so
meaning that me and Chair Liu voted against it, and we have to say that we want to revote?
You would need
no,
some.
It would be the other board members who
Board
voted
Member
for it.
Rosati.
So I guess my question still is, can we do this what Vice Chair Hadian wants in instructions to staff? Or is there a way to make a motion to basically instruct more information is needed before coming back with another recommendation for the short-term rentals?
I think you can make a motion to direct staff to collect more information and bring back a different recommendation to the planning board. What Board Member Rosati's motion that was approved was a denial of staff's recommendation to approve the proposed ordinance and take that recommendation to City Council.
Understood. Okay, Vice Chair Hadian, so if you want to go and make the motion for the instructions to staff based on what you have stated before in terms of additional information, and then to bring us back another recommendation, that can be your motion.
That's the motion with the conditions that I stated. Do you want me to repeat the conditions?
Please, if it would help
yes.
me.
This is so my motion will be to how do we say bringing the resolution back for hearing, to call it for hearing again?
Yes.
Okay, so my motion will be to bring back the proposed resolution of the Planning Board of the City of Burbank, recommending the City Council adopt an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Burbank, amending the zoning definitions in sections 10-1-203 and the land use table for R1, R1H, R2, R3, and R4, as noted in section 10-1-602 and 10-1-627, and adding Article 28 to Chapter 4 of Title 3 of the Burbank Municipal Code to allow short-term rentals as a business license, with the conditions of a city to hold one or two additional community meetings, new survey to be sent out to the residents, defined cost analysis with accurate numbers, especially for the code enforcement, and the status of 900 licenses, that how the inactive licenses will be dealt with, and how there will be rules for the applications beyond the 900. That's my motion.
I second that motion. Is there any discussion on this?
If I may, Chair Liu?
Sure. Yes, Board Member opinion.
I get easily confused, and I am confused right now. And procedurally, I don't quite, I mean, I understand what Ms. Hadian's trying to do, but I cannot see how it can be done. We just voted on the resolution as rejecting it. So I just want clarification so that I can understand. What she's trying to do right now is bring the resolution back to us, being the planning board, at some later date, with the amendments that she's recommended or she's suggesting, and that's what we're voting on. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, is that Vice Chair Hadian would like to obtain more information and then have staff come back with a resolution that would incorporate that information.
All right. So how is that going to affect the January 12th agenda item that the city council is going to take up this matter? I mean, how is this going to happen? Is all this going to happen before January 12th, and then we're going to put a resolution? I don't get it.
If I can add to it,
Sure.
Chair Lou.
Mr. Ramirez?
So what I would suggest is, I think there was a 3-2 vote to not move forward with the recommendation as staff presented. So that action's done. We understand that. That's clear. It sounds, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, Vice Chair, but from what I understood, similar to what Board Member Hadian was saying, Board Member Atukeni was saying, was that if a recommendation to introduce an ordinance for short-term rentals that amends the code as recommended with the specifics that you already said, in other words, if you're going to bring something back to us at a later date, we would like this additional analysis to be included in whatever comes forward at a later date. I think if you vote on just your recommended suggestion of what, if there is an ordinance that comes back to you, these are the things that you want to see in there, I think that is sufficient information, because at this point, what I would want to do, and not to put everybody on the spot, is we got a motion to deny the recommendation. Let us go back, analyze if there's a motion on what you would like to see come back to you at a later date for consideration, which would be a whole new de novo meeting, right, for that particular item. That can happen at some point in the future, but what it gets to is that we wouldn't be going on January 12th to the council with a recommendation for approval, because you're not providing us a recommendation for approval of the ordinance. So we need to go back and we need to reassess, and to be fair to Mr. McMillan, go back and talk to city attorney collectively and see if something does come back, how we can incorporate a lot of the things that you're talking about. But at this point, we've been given direction at this juncture that the recommendation that we brought to you tonight would not be going forward. And there was a vote, and we understand the vote's 3-2. So let us go back. But when it comes to direction for a future ordinance, if it's to be considered, and you want to memorialize that, if it does come back, we want you to look at these things and report back to us on them. I think that's well within your purview to give us direction. If you're going to look at a short-term rental ordinance, look at these things. And wherever that happens at a hearing and what decisions made subsequent to that, that's yet to be determined. So does that work? As opposed to trying to generate another motion and resolution where really we need to take and internalize what you've said and what we've heard the feedback tonight, and kind of reassess where we're at, and then if we come forward, we'll do so at another notice public meeting.
That's correct. I just wanted to make sure that if this resolution is rejected, that doesn't mean that it's gone for good, and it will be come back to be reviewed again, because beyond everything, beyond cost, beyond city, beyond all the complaints, it's health, safety, and welfare of the residents, people living in those rentals that we are aware of, that they exist, but then there is no regulation. That's my main concern.
We understand. We understand both sides of the issue that was discussed in length tonight. What I would suggest is just, if you want to memorialize that action, if there's a collective, yet I don't think we need a roll call vote, but I think if the board as a group says, if this comes back, these are the things Ms. Hadia noted that you want to include on the analysis, I think that's enough direction for staff.
And to that, I don't think it requires some sort of an amendment or a motion. I think it's generally we would ask the staff, since this particular resolution is a no-go, we would ask the staff, we would basically our input as to what we would like staff to address the next time we're visiting this issue.
Mm. So to the things that were already noted in the record, we'll go back and confirm. You don't have to read them, but if there's concurrence from the whole board that if an ordinance on this issue is to come back to you, that you want the issues noted by Vice Chair to be evaluated at what to the best of our abilities, that we bring that information forth at a future date if it's to be considered. And if there's general concurrence from the group, I mean, we can take a vote just to that, and that's enough direction for us. And we're gonna go back and reconvene as a group collectively and see where we're at.
Thank you.
Sure. Is that just for the sake of since I've got everybody in video and small video screens, Chair Lou, can we just take a vote to that effect if you're in concurrence with anything coming forward to note and address the issues that Vice Chair noted?
Yes, that's what I thought we were voting on. So so I'm fine with that.
So the clerk will just do a roll call vote to that effect.
Board Member Gamboa?
Yes.
Board Member Rosati?
No.
Board Member Altakunian?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hadian?
Yes.
And Chair Liu?
Yes.
Great.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we are moving on to our next agenda item. Thank you, everybody, for the robust discussion on this. And hopefully we will find something that will work for the community. Okay, so now we're at oral communications from the public. Any persons speaking during this period may address the board on any matter concerning city business. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. To participate, please call 818-238-3335. The phone lines are now open, so please bear with us as it may take a few minutes for the first callers to get through the line.
Councilmember Nick Schultz, you are now live with the Planning Board.
Well, good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Board. I just wanted to take a minute tonight to say hello and to introduce myself. You all probably know by now, but earlier today I was sworn in as your next member of council. And I have been with you every moment of tonight's meeting. And I just wanted to thank you very much for your tremendous service to the community. I know that having a 3.5+ hour meeting is difficult to do, but your discussion on the short-term rental regulations that were proposed was incredibly important. So thank you very much for your service. I also wanted to give a nod to staff for coming prepared tonight and answering questions, and thank you to all of the Burbank residents who called in and for sharing your thoughts and concerns on this important topic. So, Madam Chair, it's a pleasure to see you and speak with you sort of again, and I look forward to meeting with all of you on the board individually in the days and weeks to come. Have a safe and happy holiday season.
Thank you, Council Member. Congratulations, and we look forward to working with you. Do we have any other calls?
No calls in the queue.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
There are no further calls.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Sorry. There being no further public comment, I now declare the public comment period closed. Next agenda item are reports. Do we have any reports from staff?
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Next agenda item is the approval of minutes. We are approving minutes from October 12th, 2020. for the planning board meeting. Are there any questions or comments or motion? Sorry, my dog's participating now.
I can make a motion. I read the minutes.
I second.
Okay. Board Member Gamboa?
Yes.
Board Member Rosati?
Yes.
Board Member Atakunian?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hadian?
Yes.
Chair Liu?
Yes. Motion passes. So the next agenda item is introduction of additional agenda items. Planning board members may introduce new items for discussion, but no action may take place except to place the item on a future agenda. Do members of the board have any items to introduce? Yes. Board Member Rosati.
I would like to put on a future agenda item, healthy enforcement for short-term rentals. I'd like to see a report from staff of a hearty report from staff as to how we can protect our residential neighborhoods and have proper enforcement, whether it's hiring a company or adding staff. But I would like to see that report on a future agenda item.
Chair Liu, if I may.
Yes, Board Member Atakunian.
And along the same lines of the enforcement report, perhaps a report on what transpired with those 19 complaints and so many complaints, or whatever number of complaints that came in on those couple of years. How were they resolved, or what was the actual resolution of those complaints? Just to kind of explain, if it was a call made to the police department, if a report was generated, what happened? Was the report forwarded to code enforcement, and what did code enforcement do with it? What was the final resolution, and what steps that particular call or complaint went through, and how that short-term rental was treated? So along the same lines of what Mr. Rosati had requested regarding the code enforcement.
Any other items?
I just wanted to, on the request for report that Board Member Atakunian mentioned, for the code enforcement, would staff be able to define the code enforcements of having short-term rentals and the code enforcements for building and safety? If they can define on those code enforcement, that would be my recommendation.
Do you have all that, Mr. Ramirez?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, moving on to city planner comments. Or do we have any comments from Mr. Ramirez?
I'll keep it brief. Thank you all for all your input tonight. That was very helpful for us. And I commend you all. It's a tough issue to address. And you're right. There are, opinions on both sides of the court, so to speak, on this one. But we thank you for your deliberation and input. As always, very professional and very insightful. So in addition to that, I just wanted to wish all of you, if we don't see you before the end of the year, happy holidays and happy New Year. And, you've got a full docket coming in for the new year. So there's a lot of long-range planning efforts, housing element update, 2 specific plans that'll be coming back to the board and eventually, hopefully, council in the coming year. There are other efforts underway to update the zoning regulations, including density bonus and inclusionary, that'll be coming back to you. Just want to thank you all for your service. Make sure you're all safe, your families are all safe. You've done what I would consider to be an exceptional job over this COVID pandemic period to be in attendance virtually and physically here. And you're always engaged, and your comments are always well taken by staff. So thank you for all your input. Thank you for being vigilant, for being stewards in the oversight of the zoning regulations. So just wanted to say that to you all as a group, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. And I also want to echo that to you and to staff and the excellent job that you have all done. and in supporting us and doing these great reports, and also to my fellow board members. Wishing happy holidays and to our stakeholders in Burbank as well. So we are moving to the adjournment. We now adjourn to the next online planning board meeting on Monday, January 11th, 2021 at 6 p.m. The public is invited to view the meeting online or on television and will be able to provide public comment in the following two ways. The first, by leaving an e-comment on the city webpage, www.burbankca.gov/e-comments. Or the second way is by calling in directly to the planning board meeting at 818-238-3335. Thank you all for your participation and have a great evening.
Thank you all.
Christmas and Happy New Year.
Happy holidays.